Honourable members, the prayer. Lord, the God of righteousness and truth, grant to our King, to his government, to members of the Legislative Assembly, and to all in positions of responsibility, the guidance of your Spirit. May they never lead the province wrongly through love of power, desire to please, or unworthy ideas, but laying aside all private interest and prejudice, keep in mind their responsibility to seek to improve the condition of all. Amen. Honourable members, it being the last sitting day of the week, we will now be led in the singing of God Save the King by Ashley Stevenson. I invite you to participate in the language of your choice. Save our gracious King, long live our noble King. God save the King. Send him victorious, happy and glorious, long to reign over us. God save the King. Please be seated.
Introduction of visitors.
Honourable members, I have a special guest to introduce today, and a friend of the province. Seated in the Speaker's Gallery is the Consul General of Israel. She's visiting our beautiful province from Ontario, and I've had the pleasure of renewing our friendship this morning. We had the opportunity to discuss a number of issues facing the Jewish community here and abroad. I was dismayed to hear of the rise of anti-Semitism and violence against our Jewish friends, that this continues to be a major problem both here and abroad. This is absolutely unacceptable, whether it's happening in some faraway place or here on the steps of the legislature. Albertans, regardless of their color, creed, deserve to live in peace and safety. The Consul General is joined in the Speaker's Gallery by the Director, Government Relations, and the Director, Economic Affairs of the Consul of Israel. Please welcome them to the Legislative Assembly of Alberta. Honourable members, we are also joined in the galleries by a number of new staff of the Legislative Assembly of Alberta. They are participating in the orientation, a procedural orientation today. We all know that our work here inside the Assembly cannot be done without of those who serve the Assembly. There are a number of them joining us today. Please rise and receive the warm welcome of the Assembly.
Introduction of guests.
The Honourable Member for Sherwood Park has a school to introduce.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. To you and through you to the Assembly, I'm happy to introduce the students and staff from Pine Street Elementary in Sherwood Park. Please stand and receive the warm welcome of the Assembly.
The Honourable Member for Edmonton Whitemud.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'm pleased to introduce to the Assembly today Lita and Mark Bablitz. They are constituents of mine. Lita is actually an early childhood educator and a passionate member of our community. She's also living proof of the UCP's mismanagement of lab services in this province, and I'm very proud to have them here in the Assembly. I ask that they rise and receive the warm welcome of this Assembly.
Order. The Honourable Member for Airdrie East. Does the Honourable Member for Airdrie East have an introduction?
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I rise to introduce to you and through you and to all members of this Assembly a friend, Jaspreet Segu, and his family, his wife, his two children, and his in-laws who are visiting from India today. Please rise and receive the traditional warm welcome of this Assembly.
The Honourable Member for Livingston McLeod is next.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I would like to introduce to you and through you Barbara Bell, the Director of FCSS in my hometown, Claresholm. Barbara oversees programs that strengthen family bonds and enhance community well-being. I ask that my friend Barb please rise and receive the traditional warm welcome of this Assembly.
The Honourable Member for Camrose is next.
Well, thank you, Mr. Speaker. It's my honour to introduce to you and through you Jonathan Butterworth, a longtime friend, and his daughter Maya. And it's Maya's very first visit here to the Alberta Legislature, so please rise and receive the traditional warm welcome of the Chamber.
The Honourable Member for Edmonton South.
On behalf of the member of Edmonton Whiteman, I'd like to introduce through you and to you all members of the Assembly, the Ross family. Mom, Melanie, and the rest of the family, Michael, Grayson, Nolan, Gavin, please rise and receive a warm welcome from the Assembly.
The Honourable Member for Edmonton City Centre.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. It's my honor to introduce to you and through you Sophie Holzman. I had the honor to meet with her recently to hear her story and experience in the pressure in our healthcare system and the loss of her husband, Stan. She's accompanied today by Mary Petavello and Alex Glowich. I ask them to rise and receive the warm welcome of this House.
The Honourable Member for Calgary-Beddington.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. It's my pleasure to take this opportunity to introduce to you and through you two of my constituents visiting the legislature today. Dave and Joan Kimmel, will you please rise and receive the traditional warm welcome of this Assembly?
The Honourable Member for Edmonton Riverview.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker, and I rise to introduce to you and through you two members of my constituency in Edmonton Riverview, Alex Sokolowski. He's a grade 6 student at McKernan School who has political aspirations, and his father, Valerie Sokolowski. He's a professor at the University of Alberta. Please rise and receive the traditional warm welcome of the Assembly.
The Honourable Member for Calgary-Acadia.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I rise today to introduce through you and to you two of my Calgary-Acadia constituents, one of which is one of my fantastic constituency assistants. So Rogan, please stand with your mother, Allison, who's also a fellow registered nurse. So please welcome.
The Honourable Member for Edmonton Southwest.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I rise to introduce to you and through you Galia Amr, an entrepreneur and innovator who convocated this week from the University of Alberta and is a first-year student at Columbia University Law School. She is the first Canadian recipient of the Tony Patino Fellowship. Please rise and receive the traditional warm welcome of this Assembly.
Are there other introductions? The Honourable Member for Edmonton Millwoods. Meadows.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I rise to introduce to you and through you the school, Mary Henley Catholic School, grade 6 students, teachers, and staff in the beautiful riding of Edmonton Meadows. I would request everyone to rise and receive traditional and warm welcome of this Assembly.
Are there others? Seeing none.
Ministerial statements.
The Honourable Minister of Arts, Culture and the Status of Women.
Mr. Speaker, on October 7th, the world watched in horror as over 1,200 Jews were murdered by Hamas terrorists. As a result of this attack, we are in the midst of a terrible war between Israel and Hamas. Tragically, many Palestinian civilians have also been killed. Our hearts mourn the loss of so many innocent Israelis and Palestinians caught in the middle of this terrible war, and we unequivocally condemn Hamas for the death and destruction they have unleashed on Palestinians and Israelis alike. We all pray that peace will return as quickly as possible to that troubled region of our world. As Albertans, we must stand on guard against hate of all kinds from entering our borders. Sadly, during these past weeks, we've seen a distinct rise of anti-Semitism in Canada, including in Alberta. Although there can certainly be sincerely held differing views on what is the best course of action to reach long-lasting peace in the region. Those debates and conversations should never devolve into hateful placards or hateful speech. Anti-Semitism is never justifiable, no more than Islamophobia or any other form of racism is ever justifiable. No matter our race, religion, or ethnicity, we must stand against racism together. To Alberta's Jewish community, we love you. You are safe here. You are inextricably woven into our culture and our people. Please know that for every voice you hear shouting hatred on a TV screen, there are tens of thousands of Albertans that stand behind you against that same hate. I ask every single Albertan, let us all take the time to reach out to members of the communities most affected by this war, Jewish and Palestinian alike, and be a voice of calm and kindness, of quiet dialogue and respectful understanding, of love and peace. Let us never allow the ugliness and division we see thousands of miles away to enter our communities here. It is not who we are. We are all Albertans. We welcome every culture and community as one of us. And when any of our communities is hurting, anxious, or unsure, we rally around them so they know that this is their home and they will always be safe, valued, and welcomed here. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The honourable member for Calgary-Buffalo to respond on behalf of the official opposition.
Mr. Speaker, I rise today on behalf of Albertans hurting and grieving incredible loss. On October 7th, more than 1,200 Israeli civilians were killed. Since then, more than 14,000 Palestinians have been killed in Gaza. As members of this House may know, the official opposition has called for the immediate release of all hostages, for a ceasefire, and for the provision of adequate levels of humanitarian aid. Last week, members of the official opposition caucus met with leaders of the Calgary Jewish community, as well as leaders of Palestine and Muslim communities. We're planning further discussions in Edmonton as well. In these meetings, we heard that many of our fellow Albertans are in pain. They have lost loved ones in Gaza and Israel. They worry about the fate of civilians in the region. And they are experiencing a rise in hate, the likes of which they have never experienced before. The escalation of anti-Semitism, anti-Palestinian racism, and Islamophobia is causing our community members to feel unsafe, to question whether or not they should wear their religious or cultural symbols, to be scared when entering places of worship, whether a mosque or synagogue. This is unacceptable. The Alberta NDP will always stand against hate, racism, and discrimination in all forms, but words are not enough. We are committed to further advocacy in our role as the official opposition. We believe in creating an environment where everyone is welcome and feels a sense of belonging, and we will continue to listen and to offer support as best we can to all people in this province. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Member statements.
The honourable member for St. Albert has a statement to make.
Merci, Monsieur le Président. While Albertans struggle to pay their rent, buy food, and generally make it to the next paycheck, as the gravy train passes the Sky Palace to the Premier's office, an AISH recipient can't pay their power bill after their benefits were frozen for 4 years. A woman bundling her children up to flee domestic violence can't sleep the night in a fancy corporate suite. A retiree can't buy food with the hope that this government won't lose $1 billion pension dollars betting on another presidential election. Most Albertans think pulling out a CPP is a bad idea. Clearly, the UCP are not listening to most Albertans. The Premier might have even agreed that pulling out of CPP was a bad idea when she pulled it out of her own election platform. Our inbox is filled with stories of people just trying to get by after 4 years of a UCP government. The pain of living below the poverty line can't be solved with millions in misleading pension advertisements. The Premier likes to talk about energy, just not the 100% increase to Alberta's electricity bills. After 4 years, the UCP is unwilling to govern as they'd rather stomp their feet and point fingers. A new report says food bank use has reached all-time highs. Her minister says he's proud to fund food banks with roughly the same amount they're spending on pension ads. A recent Vital Signs report by the Edmonton Community Foundation says income supports are not good enough. That's an understatement. Buying a healthy food basket would take about 50% of what a person receives. But it's been a while since a member of the UCP caucus has at least accused people of receiving supports of laying around and buying Cheetos. Rural municipalities say community supports are chronically underfunded. We need to listen to them. There are entire cities where Albertans can't find a family doctor. Communities are faced with closed ERs because of staff shortages. Albertans deserve better, a government focused on addressing the issues they are facing, not one focused on making themselves and life better for themselves and their friends. We deserve better. All of us deserve better than this.
The Honourable Member for Grand Prairie.
Mr. Speaker, the federal government released its fall economic update this week. As Alberta shoulders a very high share of the national debt burden, I was hopeful that the statement would address the challenges we are facing as a nation. But I was left disappointed by the federal government again. Last year's statement promised a $4.5 billion surplus by 27-28. Instead, their forecast now is a deficit of $24 billion. Not only this, but it is followed by another $18 billion in deficit in 28-29. And there is still no path to balance. Mr. Speaker, this is just further proof that budgets do not, in fact, balance themselves. The federal economic statement offers very little as well for those struggling with high costs and affordability. It is particularly disappointing to see that the Liberal NDP alliance has chosen not to extend its targeted carbon tax relief to include all forms of home heating here in Canada, but have chosen to favor Liberal voting ridings. The Liberal minister saying that if Canadians wanted help, they should have voted Liberal. Not only does this showcase the extreme bias, but they truly are not working for all Canadians. They have picked sides and are not representing Canadians right across our country. If they truly cared about struggling Canadians, they would cancel the carbon tax immediately, or at the very least, treat every Canadian equally. The federal government's proven inability to control spending through their budget forecast and extreme favoritism are both threatening the prosperity of our country for future generations and the camaraderie we hold across provinces. Our government knows that Alberta is the economic engine of Canada and is the key to the success of Canada. And I want to assure Albertans that we will continue to advocate for policies and actions that support the livelihoods of Albertans. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The Honourable Member for Banff, Kananaskis.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. In southern Alberta, the snowy peaks and glaciers of the eastern slopes and Rocky Mountains slowly release water over the spring and summer, feeding millions of people and animals across Alberta. The critical provision of clean and abundant water here was first formally recognized in the Eastern Slopes Policy in 1977. Watershed management remains the highest priority as defined in this government policy, with recreation and tourism benefits also being extremely important. As glaciers and the winter snowpack shrink, climate change impacts are evident every day along the eastern slopes. Raging rivers are reduced to a trickle and reservoirs are desperately low by September. Many agriculturalists struggle to water their livestock and crops. There are no other sources of water for southern Alberta. How we manage the eastern slopes matters. Our government seems to have forgotten that. Rather than conserving water, they are allowing applications for coal mining exploration. This will not only pollute this precious water, but use much of it, making less available for cows, fish, and people. Rather than protecting the intact forests and the headwaters, the government supports logging these sensitive ecosystems. Logging practices on the eastern slopes could be designed to protect our communities from wildfire, drought, and flood, but it isn't planned that way. Rather than implementing sustainable multi-use recreation plans for Albertans, the government fails to adequately manage motorized recreation that continues to wreak havoc on wetlands and wildlife habitat. Collaborative planning with diverse user groups could address these impacts, but the government refuses to implement the recommendations stemming from those groups. We could pass the Eastern Slopes Protection Act. We could work with communities, First Nations, and forestry companies to enable sustainable forestry management practices, and we could create better trail management plans. Because at the end of the day, Mr. Speaker, climate change doesn't care if we're ready. It's already here. And if we don't act now, we will foreclose on the options to ensure the water on the eastern slopes continues to flow.
Honourable members, the time is now 1:50, and that makes it oral question period. And the Leader of His Majesty's Loyal Opposition has the call.
Mr. Speaker, last night the government held its last screened telephone town hall to sell their risky UCP pension. Their own panel chair, however, said it was, quote, critical to meet with Albertans in person before finalizing any decision, and as a result, he committed to hosting them in December of this year. But with only a week left to go, no in-person consultations have been announced for December. So to the Premier, will they be, and if not, why not?
The Honourable the Premier.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The last of the online telephone town halls occurred. We've had an extraordinary number of people participate in them. I believe we're up to about 75,000, nearly 100,000 people who've participated online. And we're going to ask the chair of that committee, Jim Dinning, to give us his impressions of where we find ourselves. We know that we need to get more information. Two of the things that we've heard is people want to know a little bit more about portability, and they want to wait for the chief actuary to give us a final number. So we'll see what his recommendations are.
The Honourable the Leader of the Opposition.
Well, that sounds like a hedge to me, and yet another broken promise. Yep. And when paired with the government spending $7.5 million on ads promoting fake facts and distributing a survey that failed to include the simple question on whether to stay in the CPP, it appears that every decision on this matter so far has lacked the necessary integrity. So to the Premier, how can Albertans possibly trust her with their most important lifelong investment with a record like that?
Yes. The Honourable the Premier.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The member opposite during the campaign was untruthful with Albertans about what was happening with the pension discussion. They were the ones who were scaring seniors, saying that their pension would be gone, and that was not right. So what we have had to do is overcome the misinformation, get people the appropriate information, have the discussion about what the benefits of an Alberta pension would be in terms of increased benefits, reduced premiums, give them the guarantee that it would be put to a referendum should they so choose, and that all the assets would be put into the fund.
The Honourable point of order is noted at 1:52. The Honourable Leader of the Opposition.
Well, Mr. Speaker, the government was untruthful during the election when they didn't talk about this issue at all. Now, meanwhile, the Alberta NDP has already started the government's job, and our first in-person town hall had nearly 500 people attend. On top of that, our pension survey did ask the question, and 37,000 unique responses came back. In both cases, Albertans have overwhelmingly told us they want to keep the CPP and they want you to take their hands off their pension. To the Premier, why won't you do that?
The Honourable the Premier.
Well, Mr. Speaker, during the campaign, I said exactly the same thing that I said now. We would release the report and we would see if Albertans want to go to a referendum. I did exactly what I said we were going to do. The report has now been released. People now know that we would be able to increase benefits, reduce premiums, and that we would have a substantial amount of money that would be transferred to us. But we want to hear more from Albertans about whether they want to go to a referendum. I'm looking forward to seeing what Jim Dinning comes back with his recommendations, and we'll go from there.
Order, order, order. The Honourable, the official opposition House Leader, the member for Edmonton Millwoods, has a question.
Yesterday marked the
attend of the UCP's telephone town halls on gambling with Albertans' pensions, and clearly this government thinks that's enough. 5 sessions of pre-screened callers is all the people of Alberta get from this government. On this side of the House, we've announced a number of in-person town halls. We will be going out and talking directly with Albertans about their retirement. So the last chance to the Premier, what are the dates and times for your in-person town halls, and where can people register? Why will you not face Albertans on this issue?
The Honourable the Minister of Finance, the President of Treasury Board.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Appreciate the opportunity to respond. So far, the 5 telephone town halls have been discussed. 76,825 Albertans have attended the pension plan telephone town halls. Almost 69,000 have listened by telephone. Almost 10,000 have listened online. In total, there have been 3,700.
The Minister of Finance.
In total, there have been 3,745 individual comments, including questions, suggestions, and feedback, both online and on telephone. Almost 150 Albertans have had a chance to discuss their opinions live or hear their comments live during the town hall.
The Honourable the Member for Edmonton Millwoods.
The Minister of Finance really likes numbers. Here's a number, Mr. Speaker. On last night's telephone town hall, 25 people actually got to have their say. 25! It's unacceptable. One of the UCP panelists has claimed that no Albertan had been opposed to leaving the CPP during the Fair Deal process, when truthfully, the majority of the respondents opposed. It's in the Fair Deal panel report. Another panelist told callers that $334 billion this government is claiming will come to Alberta is likely not the actual number. Let's not forget Jim Ginning told Albertans that he has no complaints with the CPP. Even their hand-picked panelists know this is a bad idea. When will they back away from this nonsense and leave CPP alone?
The Honourable the Minister of Finance.
Mr. Speaker, like the Premier just said, what we've done is we released the report that was commissioned. That was a recommendation of the Fair Deal panel. Who did we reach out to through the RFP? We got back Morneau Chappelle, now LifeWorks, one of the most reputable firms across the country dealing with actuarial and pension analysis, to give us a report. It's their number that claims $334 billion. I've been clear with Albertans, if that number or any other information changes, so will the engagement with Albertans. I look forward to meeting with Mr. Dinning very soon and hearing what the initial feedback is.
Honourable Leader, Official Opposition House Leader.
Mr. Speaker, even with a survey that didn't ask the question, do you want to leave the CPP, Albertans have been clear about their thoughts. Doug from Fort McMurray told the panel, and I quote, "I wholly disagree with this." Roger from Red Deer wanted to know how Albertans could even have a conversation when the government won't provide accurate numbers. These are the messages from Albertans. People are being ignored by this Premier. When will they start listening? When will they commit to consulting in person? And will they abandon this foolish Alberta pension plan and stop causing stress to Alberta's seniors?
The Honourable the Minister of Finance.
There's only one side of this House that's causing stress for Alberta seniors, and it's clear it's on that side. Mr. Speaker, I go back to what we're doing. We're engaging with Albertans on a conversation. We're getting a number from the Chief Actuary. The feds have made it clear that this is our right to consider as a province, as it is any province that joined CPP in 1966. The reason this came from the Fair Deal panel as a top recommendation is that it holds promise for the province, for every Alberta family, every Alberta business, the Alberta economy overall. It warrants fair consideration.
The Honourable Member for Edmonton Rutherford has a question.
Mr. Speaker, the recent tailing pond spill at Curl Oil Sands project is incredibly concerning. This is the 3rd major spill this year, yet what is more concerning is the Energy Minister's dismissal, stating it was merely muddy waters, unquote. Previous spills have wreaked havoc on the Muskeg River. Indigenous communities have been experiencing serious health concerns due to contamination. To the Premier, why is this minister downplaying Albertan and Indigenous people's concerns downstream from this oil spill?
Good. The order, the Honourable the Minister of Environment and Protected Areas.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker, and I do want to thank the member for the question. I do want to point out that we have hundreds of water
water monitoring stations across the oil sands. We are aware of this incident, Mr. Speaker, and the AER is working with the operator to address the culvert situation and ensure water safety. I do want to be clear, Mr. Speaker, I know the members opposite aren't listening, but this was not a leak from a tailings pond, and the water that was released is not processed water from tailings. It is drainage from the surrounding landscape. But, Mr. Speaker, incidents like this are exactly why there's monitoring in place and why it's the AER's job to protect public safety and the environment.
The honourable member for Edmonton Rutherford.
The Energy Minister visited the project after the most recent spill. He congratulated them on social media for their top-notch environmental standards. Then he permitted the third accidental release. The muddy water, quote, for the minister is referring to, contaminates the local ecosystems and biodiversity, and I highly doubt you would be...
Order. The honourable member for Edmonton Rutherford.
I doubt the minister would be saying such callous things if he were relying on the river for his drinking water and food source. How is the minister going to prevent a fourth leak?
The Honourable the Minister of Environment and Protected Areas.
Mr. Speaker, I do want to point out that the members of the opposition creating fear and misinformation about drinking water is absolutely shameful.
Yes, it is.
We continue to make sure that drinking water is safe for communities downstream. For months, rigorous water testing has been conducted by the regional municipality of Wood Buffalo and reviewed by Alberta officials. The review shows that the drinking water in the area remains safe. Mr. Speaker, the quality of the drinking water in this area is as good or better than anywhere in the province, and we will absolutely continue to monitor that for the impacted community.
The honourable member for Edmonton Rutherford.
The repeated incidents involving the oil sands are alarming, considering it's 100 parts per million over the total suspended as solids allowable, which affects the water, the drinking water for the humans, the wildlife, and the Indigenous community. Albertans should be able to trust the minister to ensure that the AER is doing its job. By my count, both are failing. How can Albertans trust the government or believe that the minister is doing either? They have failed Albertans here. Is the minister or the AER to be to blame for this?
The Honourable Minister of Environment and Protected Areas.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. I do want to be clear. The health, safety and well-being of Albertans is our top priority, and as a government, we have taken action to support responsible development and ensure water is safe for communities downstream through rigorous testing and monitoring. Mr. Speaker, I can absolutely say that water testing conducted by the department since the spring shows that the drinking water in the area remains safe. We will absolutely continue to work with municipalities, with Indigenous communities, and with oil sands companies to address this issue. The Premier takes it as a top priority, and it is the #1 priority in my mandate letter as well.
The honourable member for Calgary Mountain View has a question.
Under the UCP government, power prices have quadrupled and hit record highs. 24% of households in Alberta report that they've had to reduce or forego essentials for at least 1 month to pay their energy bills. All this government has done so far is offer band-aid solutions and even more debt with their deferral scheme. Easy question to the minister. What is this government going to do to protect Albertans being forced to choose between keeping their lights on and food on the table?
The order. The Honourable the Minister of Affordability and Utilities.
It's great to see the power prices coming down. We're almost at half of what they were in August. This is because we're bringing on dispatchable baseload power provided by natural gas generators. We're going to have another 1,700 to 2,000 megawatts on by the end of this year, and a further 2,000 brought on next year. We are continuing to fix the prices. We're continuing to fix the market. We're doing the work that the NDP failed to do when they brought in renewable energy.
Member for Calgary Mountain View.
The latest report from the Market Surveillance Administrator shows the spike in prices is due to a few companies controlling the market and charging massive markups for power. They even specifically reference TransAlta and Heartland for this behavior. Now these two companies are about to merge, and they will control almost half of the dispatchable power in this province. Has the government even done any analysis on the impacts of this merger on people's power bills? And what is the minister going to do about it?
Order, order. The Honourable the Minister of Affordability and Utilities.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and thanks again to the member for that question. It is a vitally important question. We are watching it very closely. Of course, the government doesn't decide on business mergers. That is up to the regulators, but we are following it incredibly closely to make sure that we have all the market corrections in place so that this merger does not impact the overall market. The total is not near 50%. It is in fact 29.4%, and with all the power generation being brought on next year, it is expected to drop below 20% of the market. We are watching it closely.
The Honourable Member for Calgary Mountain View.
The Market Surveillance Administrator also concludes that solar generation is driving down prices, while natural gas being intentionally taken offline is driving up prices. But still, this government devotes their energy to trying to blame the renewables industry. Economic withholding, the intentional taking offline of power, is government policy, and it is what's driving up prices. And it's about to get worse. Mr. Speaker, people can't afford it. What is this government going to do about it?
The Honourable the Minister of Affordability and Utilities.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. It's great that we have also directed the Alberta Electric Systems Operator and the Market Surveillance Administrator to look into this issue, to provide feedback so that we can correct the market and make sure this activity doesn't happen again. Again, we are doing the work that the NDP failed to do by correcting the market, by correcting the system so that we can have affordable, dependable, and reliable power, not just during the daytime, not just during when it's windy, but all the time, especially during winter. Here, here.
Order, order, order. The Honourable Member for Edmonton City Centre has the call.
Mr. Speaker, recently I spoke with Sophie Holzman at her home in St. Albert. In September, she lost her husband Stan due to a post-surgical infection in his hip. He waited over 6 hours in a crowded ER, then 4 days for surgery to drain his infection after being literally forgotten and then having it repeatedly delayed. Sophie says if she'd known the true state of chaos in healthcare, she would have kept Stan at home, looked for care outside our province. She asked me to ask the Premier why this government is refusing to be honest with Albertans about the crisis in our healthcare system.
The Honourable the Minister of Health.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and my heart goes out to that family. And unfortunately, there are too many families that are sharing similar stories. That's why we need to do something different. And obviously, what's been happening, what's been allowed to happen in our healthcare system is not working. And that's why we are refocusing the healthcare system, going back to look at actually prioritizing patient needs, making sure that we are improving the system, strengthening the system, and in fact, Mr. Speaker, addressing these issues that are brought forward.
The Honourable Member for Edmonton City Centre.
Given that Sophie doesn't blame the healthcare workers who she says were under pressure and run off their feet, and given she told me that they need more support, the system needs to be fixed, and given she said, I blame the government for not improving the healthcare system, and suggested this government could be kind, respect healthcare workers so they want to stay instead of wanting to leave, to the Premier, Sophie is here today. What do you have to say to her?
The Honourable the Minister of Health.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And to Sophie, I say we're working on it. And in fact, Mr. Speaker, we have more doctors in the province than we did when the members opposite were in power. In 2017, there were 4,838 doctors. Right now in 2023, we have 5,470 doctors. We've added 3,900 nurses in the last year. We've added 255 doctors in the last 4 months alone, Mr. Speaker, of which 109 are family physicians. But we know more needs to get done, and we also have to improve the quality of the health care. We are on that, and that's what we're working towards.
The Honourable Member for Edmonton City Centre.
Mr. Speaker, given that Sophie describes this government's plan to reorganize our healthcare system as, quote, shuffling deck chairs on the Titanic, and given she's told me she's speaking out to support healthcare workers and warn others about the crisis this government denies, and given this government has lots of time, millions of dollars to focus on propaganda campaigns, contracts for its friends, bigger gifts for themselves, to the Premier, What real, tangible action are you going to take to ensure no other Albertan has to suffer the needless loss of a loved one like Sophie and her family has?
The order. The Honourable the Minister of Health.
Mr. Speaker, thank you for the question. In fact, yesterday I made an announcement on nurse practitioners as another valuable member of the healthcare profession that is going to add to the overall numbers in the workforce to reduce strain. Mr. Speaker, the member opposite, the NDP health critic himself, the member from Edmonton City Centre said, and I quote, I support the direction they're going in. He applauded the idea and the direction we're going in. Thank you to the member opposite for supporting the work we're doing.
The Honourable Member for West Yellowhead has a question.
Mr. Speaker, Albertans are starting to get out and enjoy the trails on Alberta's Crown land more and more each year, with this year being the busiest yet. The Rocky Mountain-hosted Nordig Rail Trail has been 30 years in the making and is a multi-use trail built along the historic Canadian Northern Western Railway. So to the Ministry of Forestry and Parks, can you provide this House with an update on the status of this project?
Good question.
The Honourable the Minister of Forestry and Parks.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and thanks to the member for the question. I was pleased to stand with the Reeve Council members from Clearwater County and the surrounding area for the ribbon cutting of the beautiful Tauntaun Trestle and the historic Canadian Northwestern Railway Trail. We commend Clearwater County for the concept to transform an abandoned rail line into a remarkable outdoor corridor. We invite Albertans and visitors alike to come and experience this historic trail that leads to the Tauntaun Trestle and has a new multi-use trail leading to it.
The Honourable Member for West Yellowhead.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker and Minister. Given the rail trail will help build regional tourism along this historic route, and given that there's been a 25% growth over the last 2 summers, and given this will allow Albertans and visitors alike to experience our world-class trail system for generations to come, could the Minister kindly share with the House the primary objective of this project as it enters its next phase?
The Honourable the Minister of Forestry and Parks.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. That's an excellent question. I'd be happy to share with the next phase of the project. We will link Sunset Creek to the Chambers Creek Provincial Recreation Area and include a new parking area near the Tauntaun Trestle. The final phase will connect Chambers Creek Provincial Recreation Area to the Rocky Mountain House area with 20 kilometres of upgraded trail. When complete, the trail will include a variety of amenities. This will complete this incredible 109-kilometre trail upgrade and will serve as a great example of how we want our public land to be used.
Member for West Yellowhead.
Thank you, Minister. Given that once this project is complete, the trail will include rest stops, picnic sites, and remote campsites, and given that this will provide locals and tourists with opportunities to hike, mountain bike, cross-country ski, and snowshoe, given that this trail improvement project will attract visitors from all over the province as well as our neighbours across the border in British Columbia, could the Minister of Tourism and Sport please emphasize the significance of projects like this for our province's tourism sector?
The Honourable the Minister of Tourism and Sport.
Well, thank you, Mr. Speaker, and thank you to that honourable member for the question. His constituents are very well served by his time in this chamber. Alberta has a tremendous story to tell, Mr. Speaker. The landscapes, the rich culture, and the deep history. This trail system will create new year-round tourism opportunities, Mr. Speaker, for visitors from across Alberta, across the country, and across the world to come see. Whether it's mountain biking, snowshoeing, hiking, or any other outdoor recreation, all 4 seasons year-round, I tell you, Mr. Speaker, it's a great opportunity to share Alberta's story with the world, and I can't wait to see it myself.
The Honourable Member for Edmonton-Whitemud is next.
Mr. Speaker, today we are joined in the Assembly by my constituent Lita Bablitz. I wish the reason she was here was so I could celebrate her commitment to early childhood education, her sharp wit, and her passion helping community members in need. But no, Lita's here today because she is living proof of the consequences of this government's mishandling of lab services. Lita was misdiagnosed by Dynalife with breast cancer, but she didn't find that out until after she had had a partial mastectomy. Lita wants the chance to share her story with the Minister of Health. She's here now. Will the Minister agree to meet with her directly after question period?
The Honourable the Minister of Health.
Mr. Speaker, I'm happy to meet with her. I'm happy to meet with any Albertan who has a story to share on how we can improve the healthcare system. Obviously, there have been issues, and we are looking to address those issues. I'm very happy to meet with her.
The Honourable Member for Edmonton-Whitemud.
Well, given that Lita has made multiple attempts through AHS, Alberta Health, Dynalife, FOIP, and the Ombudsman's Office to try to get access to her own medical records and is still being denied full access. And given that she and I have written multiple times to the Minister of Health and to this current Minister of Health asking them to meet with her, and those letters have all gone unanswered, and given the UCP have already been forced to admit what a disastrous mistake it was to privatize lab services, and that mistake affected real people like Lita. I'll ask again, will the Minister meet directly with Lita today after question period? Today, Ms.
The Honourable the Minister of Health.
I already said yes. I'm happy to meet with her. I know that my office is always responding. That is something that I've been very clear. Every letter that we get, every email, every contact that we have gets responded to. Mr. Speaker, I am happy to meet with this individual and hear her story.
Honourable Member for Edmonton. Order. The Honourable Member for Edmonton Whitemud.
Given that Lita and I will be looking forward to meeting with the Minister of Health right after question period outside the rotunda, and given that receiving an initial cancer diagnosis was understandably devastating for Lita, her husband, and her 2 boys, and given that after the partial mastectomy, then being told she was misdiagnosed, she was also then denied post-cancer operative care because she didn't have cancer, and given that far too many Albertans know firsthand what a disaster the UCP's decision to privatize lab services has been, from long wait times, delayed diagnosis, and now misdiagnosis, will the Minister of Health apologize to Lita for what she's done?
The Honourable the Minister of Health.
Mr. Speaker, as someone who has had cancer herself, I've had cancer, I've had eye cancer, I know how devastating it is. And my heart goes out to Lita and her family. I know what she's going through. Mr. Speaker, I will gladly meet with her. It is the very reason that when we saw delays in lab services, we took immediate action. We have since made sure that the delays have been overcome, and I'm happy to report I got an update today that wait times have in fact improved right across the province. Mr. Speaker, we're going to continue to improve the system.
The Honourable Member, order. The Honourable Member for St. Albert.
Merci, Monsieur le Président. The Premier has been thinking about accessibility lately. She's working hard to make herself more accessible to lobbyists and for gifts. She's worked hard to make government contracts and jobs for friends and insiders. Albertans with disabilities, however, don't get...
Order. Enough. The Honourable Member is asking her first question. Please, go ahead from the top.
Merci, Monsieur le Président. Premier has been thinking about accessibility lately. She's working hard to make herself more accessible to lobbyists and for their gifts. She's worked hard to make government contracts available and jobs available for friends and insiders. Albertans with disabilities, however, do not get very far with this government. After tabling bills to prepare to gamble away CPP and ensuring gifts to politicians are less transparent, when will this UCP government commit to finally catching up with the rest of Canada in answering the call from disability advocates and create provincial accessibility legislation?
The Honourable Member of Seniors, Community and Social Services.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The Premier and I met with Rick Hansen a couple weeks back to talk about accessibility, Mr. Speaker, and some of the important ideas that his organization has, as well as to hear the things that have taken place elsewhere across the country. My department continues to take that information and work with disability groups across the province to look for ways that we can improve accessibility all across the province of Alberta. I'm also happy to say, Mr. Speaker, under this Premier's leadership, that we've increased funding to people with development disabilities by a little over $100 million under this budget, Mr. Speaker, including increasing staff wages working with this important demographic.
Wow. The Honourable Member of St. Albert.
Given the Government of Canada brought federal accessibility legislation into force in 2019, it's 2023 now, and given that advocates like Barrier Free Alberta have been calling for this game-changing legislation, and given that Accessible Canada has done much of the work outlining how governments might legislatively identify, remove, and prevent barriers to accessible or to important areas like the built environment, programs, services, communication, procurement, employment, and so much more, when will the Premier finally find time to focus on the issues that matter to constituents? Accessible legislation is needed now.
The Honourable the Minister of Senior, Community and Social Services.
Well, thank you, Mr. Speaker. Again, the NDP are struggling to listen. I don't think that's surprising anymore. I just said that the Premier has found significant time to meet with disabled organizations to be able to learn about accessibility issues, Mr. Speaker. Our largest focus, Mr. Speaker, right now when it comes to the people with development disability side of the file is reducing the terrible wait lists that were created underneath the NDP government. Where they stopped investing in this important issue, Mr. Speaker, and caused countless people to suffer, Mr. Speaker, waiting for services. I'm happy to report that we have have reduced wait times significantly.
Order. The honourable member for St. Albert.
Given that accessibility and accommodations for people with disabilities have been mandated in Ontario since the approval of Disabilities Act in 2005, with our neighbouring provinces making great progress, and given the UCP instead chose a route to de-index critical supports and eliminate oversight of things like how long it takes to apply for AISH. So when will this government stop being one of the last jurisdictions in Canada and bring forward accessibility legislation? We're not talking about PDD.
The Honourable Minister of Senior Community and Social Services.
I'm also happy to talk about AISH, Mr. Speaker. I think you probably heard this government indexed AISH. I think the member may not have heard that announcement, Mr. Speaker. We also continue to invest in making sure that we reduce.
Wonderful apology. Appreciate it. The Honourable Minister.
Mr. Speaker, you continue to watch the NDP who are just so angry at Albertans for rejecting them as a government again. Every time, Mr. Speaker, I just want you to know we continue to work tirelessly to reduce the wait times that were created by the NDP government's complete failure.
Order. The member had her opportunity to ask the question. The minister has his opportunity to answer.
The party of fear and smear and angry is still here, Mr. Speaker. Even if they change their name, they can't change their stripes, Mr. Speaker. But we're going to continue to make sure we stand with people with disabilities all across our province.
Order. The Honourable member for Vermilion Lloydminster Wainwright.
Mr. Speaker, Budget 2023 estimated that Alberta's debt servicing costs for the 2023-24 fiscal year would exceed $2.8 billion. This is more than 4 times the annual operating budget of the Ministry of Justice. Can the Minister of Finance please share with this Assembly his plans to retire the debt as soon as possible so we can stop paying interest to overseas bankers and instead put these billions of dollars towards providing services that Albertans deserve?
The Honourable Minister of Finance and the President of Treasury Board.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and thank you for the very important question. I think it's one of the most important questions that this House should always be asking. You're not wrong. Debt servicing costs were projected to be $2.8 billion in Budget 23. At the mid-year update next week that I'll present, you'll see that number has grown to over $3.1 billion, over $300 million increase since budget. This is one of the fastest growing line items over the last 15 years in this province. And it takes away the fiscal capacity to do all of these important things that people on both sides.
The Honourable Member for Vermilion, Lloydminster Wainwright.
Thank you, Minister. Mr. Speaker, given that going into 2015-16 fiscal year, there was $12.98 billion of debt, given that by 2019-20 fiscal year, the time when the NDP left government, that number had ballooned to over $62 billion. Wow. And given our government's commitment to prudent fiscal management, can the same minister please outline some of the steps he has taken to ensure Albertans aren't saddled with the consequences of irresponsible government spending?
The Honourable Minister of Finance and the President of Treasury Board.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And to quote the former finance minister, they spent like gangsters during their term in government. We're still feeling the repercussions. But the only way to pay down principal is to budget and actually land surpluses at the end of the year. That is the only way. You deal with the debt servicing costs within the year, but to pay down principal, like we were able to do the last fiscal year, $13.3 billion, you avoid these refinancing costs. Right now, the province needs to refinance 3 years' worth of debt, $26 billion, with the interest rates at double.
The Honourable Member.
Thank you, Minister, for that answer. Mr. Speaker, given that this government's decision to lower corporate taxes has actually led to increased corporate tax revenues, and given that a strong economy is key to providing Albertans with high-quality services without racking up debt, can the same minister please share with the Assembly how this government's approach to the economy brings great benefits to all Albertans?
The Honourable Minister of Finance.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And I think what we saw in the fall federal economic statement from the federal government is that their corporate income tax is declining, almost $14 billion from their budget. What we're seeing here is substantially different. Under the NDP's time, at a 12% rate, you'd see something around $3 billion in corporate income tax revenue. Last year, we saw a historic high of $8.2 billion. This year, we're still extremely strong at around $6.8 billion. And that is what happens when you grow the pie, you bring in business, you grow the economy. That's what we're doing.
Order, order, order. The honourable member for Edmonton Decore.
Mr. Speaker, this government's obsession with renaming and reshuffling organizations isn't solving Alberta's real problems. They passed the Fair Registration Act 4 years ago, and then they gave it a fresh coat of paint, calling it Fairness for Newcomers. And now they have a private member's bill doing essentially the same thing. What does the minister have to show for all the rebranding? Can he enlighten this House on when our internationally trained professionals will finally start contributing to Alberta's economy?
The Honourable Minister of Immigration and Multiculturalism.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and thank you very much to the member for the question. We are very happy to have this private member's bill to establish a council to recommend to ensure that we have everybody in this province who comes here reaches full potential through proper credential recognition.
They're here.
Honourable member for Edmonton Decore.
Given the government's track record of failing to boost fairness, transparency and accountability in credentialing processes, and given that they are calling in skilled workers only to hang up as soon as they answer, will the minister give us a definitive answer on when his government plans to fix their bizarre recruitment strategy and actually commit to helping the skilled newcomers looking to make Alberta their home?
The Honourable Minister of Immigration and Multiculturalism.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and thank you to the member for the question again. This government has done so much for newcomers in the last 4 years, and I'm so proud, including right from day in 2019 through Bill 11, creating a legislation here, the Fairness Registration Practices Act, for the newcomers in this province. And through that legislation, we have seen amazing improvement for the newcomers' credential recognition.
The honourable member for Edmonton Decore.
Given the critical state of our healthcare system teetering to the brink of collapse, it's a spectacle to witness the government's misled priorities. And given the chaos unfolding in our social essential services, it's almost laughable that today there are no clear pathways or transparent processes for internationally trained newcomers. Given the stakes at hand, Minister, it's time to some straight answers. When will internationally trained newcomers be able to get work in their profession of choice?
The Honourable Minister.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And thank you to the member for the question again. Mr. Speaker, we have established a number of ways to make sure that internationally trained people here in Alberta go through the system so quickly, and that's why we have this healthcare professions. That we created a special pathway for healthcare professions, for IT professions, and we are also working on the tourism and the hospitality industry as well. So we are well set to make sure that everybody gets recognized here for their qualifications.
The honourable member for Calgary Fish Creek.
Thank you, Minister.
Mr. Speaker, the constituents of Calgary Fish Creek, this MLA, the government of Alberta, and indeed probably all Albertans recognize that education is essential to the development and well-being of our society and will continue to be for generations to come. However, many of my constituents have shared with me their concerns about a shortage of teachers and the teaching assistants in their schools. Can the Minister of Education please explain to this Assembly what was the improved funding for the number of teachers and teaching assistants in Calgary schools, and what is our government doing to ensure these schools are meeting employment targets?
The Honourable Minister of Education.
Well, thank you, Mr. Speaker. The member is right. We've recently increased funding to our education system to help ensure that we can hire additional teachers and educational assistants. And specifically in budget 2023, we've increased funding to education by over 5%. With respect to Calgary schools in specific, about $2 billion goes to our school divisions in Calgary, to the Calgary Board of Education and to Calgary Catholic School Division to help them hire the staff that they need, and we'll continue working with them, Mr. Speaker.
The honourable member for Calgary Fish Creek.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and to the Minister for that answer. I am pleased that increased resources have been provided to school boards. It is clear that this government is committed to improving educational opportunities for all Albertans. Mr. Speaker, given that this government has allocated funding for a number of teaching positions that remain vacant, can the same minister share what the government is doing to help increase the number of qualified teachers and assistants to fill these vacant but funded positions?
Great. The Minister of Education.
Well, thank you, Mr. Speaker. A very important question. I'm very happy to be able to stand and report to the Assembly today that as the new school year gets underway, we've collected some additional information from our 4 Metro school divisions. Our 4 Metro school divisions are reporting over 1,200 new teachers hired into the system, over 450 additional educational assistants hired into the system, and over 94 other certified staff. That's just our 4 Metro school divisions. Mr. Speaker, of course, across the rest of the province, those numbers will be higher, but we're continuing to work with them.
The honourable member, Calgary Fish Creek.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Given that there has been a global trend of individuals choosing to leave the teaching profession, and given an increase in classroom complexity, can the same minister please elaborate on some of the factors that increase classroom complexity, the impact on the number of people deciding to leave the teaching profession, and what the government of Alberta is doing to address this?
The Minister of Education.
Well, thank you, Mr. Speaker. Indeed, we have heard very loud and clear from our school divisions that, of course, our classrooms are becoming increasingly complex. There's a higher proportion of students with that require assistance that have English as an additional language. Of course, more students that have learning and other cognitive impairments and disabilities. So to help assist, Budget 23 included $126 million in new funding. We created the new Classroom Complexity Grant that goes specifically to higher educational assistants, speech-language pathologists, psychologists, and others to help deal with these issues.
The honourable member for Sherwood Park.
Mr. Speaker, Alberta's municipal governments are struggling after nearly 5 years of UCP government. Costs have been downloaded, their grant funding cut and delayed, and they've been asked to do more with less. This impacts the residents they serve with reduced services or higher property taxes or both. As the Mayor of Strathcona County told media at the recent RMA conference, funding has not kept up with the growing challenges and changing needs of municipalities. Can the Minister explain why his government has failed to support municipalities?
The Honourable Minister of Municipal Affairs.
Well, thank you, Mr. Speaker, and thank you to the Honourable Member. I have to report that our government spends a lot of time talking to municipalities, supporting them constantly. In fact, Mr. Speaker, by the end of this year, I will announce the new LGFF funding formula, which is an example of this government saying yes to municipalities. They wanted a funding formula that goes up and down with provincial revenues. This government said yes. I'm looking forward to announcing the way that that's going to be rolled out by the end of this year. And Mr. Speaker, we will continue to work with them.
The honourable member for Sherwood Park.
Thank you to the Minister. Given that one of the major financial issues impacting municipalities is the huge unpaid property tax bills that are outstanding, $268 million as of March, and given that the last time the Minister was in this role, his plan to address this, in his words, did not work. And given that the problem results in cuts or higher property taxes, can the Minister inform the House of the current amount of unpaid taxes municipalities are owed and explain what he is doing to address it now?
The Minister of Municipal Affairs.
Well, I'm grateful for the question because we have very good news to report. The Honourable Member's right. Our first effort didn't do as well as we thought it did. But since then, with the assistance of our Energy Minister, we're making it harder for energy companies to apply for or transfer wells if they're behind in their property taxes. And it has made it better, Mr. Speaker. I will ask my staff to get as close as we can to the current number. I'll get it to the Honourable Member. It's a reasonable question. But what I mostly have to report is things are getting better due to our ongoing efforts.
The Honourable Member for Sherwood Park.
That is good news, Minister, but given that the government has reduced its municipal grant funding by 50% since the UCP were first elected, and given that the municipalities are required to pass a motion in council to write off 50% of the property taxes owed by the provincial government, why is the UCP government continuing to withhold revenue and download costs onto their municipal partners? Is that all Albertans can expect from this minister?
Good question.
The Honourable Minister of Municipal Affairs.
Mr. Speaker, I would say that what we know now is on the LGFF formula, where the revenue goes up and down with provincial revenue, that next year the revenue to municipalities in the first year of LGF will go up by about 14%.
Hear, hear.
Now, Mr. Speaker, I wouldn't want to mislead the House because what I just said is accurate. The next year it will probably go down a little bit. It's part of the formula that municipalities ask for, is the number to go up and down with provincial revenue. But next year it'll go up by 14%.
Hear, hear. Hear, hear. The Honourable Member for Edmonton Beverly Clairview.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Last weekend I had the opportunity to speak with many educational support workers. I heard their worries, concerns and frustrations. Overcrowded classrooms, students with complex needs not receiving the support or tools they need, dysregulated students in offices because one-to-one support isn't there. People are exhausted. There are simply not enough staff. Their working conditions are our kids' learning conditions. Can the minister explain when the 20,000 school support worker positions that were lost in 2020 will finally be fully funded by this government?
Good question. The Honourable Minister of Education.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. As I mentioned a moment ago, we have increased funding to education by over 5%. That includes $820 million in new funding to help address enrollment pressures that we're seeing in our school divisions. In addition, we have created the new Classroom Complexity Grant. This new grant provides $126 million in new funding over the course of the next few years to help hire educational assistants, speech-language pathologists, and other individuals to help ensure that our classrooms and our kids have the support that they need.
The Honourable Member for Edmonton Beverly Clairview.
Given that the government's own statistics say there are fewer EAs working in our schools this year than last, given that we know school funding hasn't kept up with growth or it doesn't make up for 3 years of underfunding, and given that means school staff are often forced to look for a second or even third job, and given that many feel the work that they are doing to support kids really doesn't matter to this government, what plans exactly does the minister have for showing these workers they are valued?
The Honourable Minister of Education.
Well, Mr. Speaker, I can say definitively that the Government of Alberta and this side of the House absolutely supports our educational staff, our teachers, our educational assistants, and other staff. We greatly value and respect their work, which is precisely why we're providing new investments to help hire additional staff. And as I mentioned a moment ago, I'm proud to report that our 4 major school divisions have been very successful in hiring additional staff. 1,200 new teachers have joined our 1,200 have joined our metro school divisions in the upcoming school year, including 450 educational assistants as well.
The Honourable Member.
Given that we know school support staff earn on average around $34,000 per year, with EAs earning even less at $26,400, less than a living wage, and given that despite this, these folks remain dedicated to students and they show up to work and do the very best they can for kids every single day, and given that we know an investment in these workers is an investment in our future and in our kids, will this minister make the necessary investments in these workers to ensure that education support workers aren't living in poverty?
The Honourable Minister.
We absolutely will, as we have, Mr. Speaker. As I mentioned, we've provided $126 million in new funding specifically for educational assistants and other support staff in our schools. We've provided $820 million in new funding to our school divisions to help deal with enrollment pressures. Our school divisions, at the end of the day, of course, are the ones who directly hire and manage the staffing needs of their respective schools and their divisions. It's government's job to ensure that they have the support and resources that they need to do their job. We're committed to doing that, as I've demonstrated over the course of these questions, Mr. Speaker.
The Honourable Member for Livingston MacLeod.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. In November of 2021, our government successfully negotiated and signed on to the federal-provincial childcare funding agreement with a promise to reduce childcare costs to an average of $10 per day by 2026. Since then, childcare costs in the province have been reduced by more than half for parents, but more affordable childcare costs has meant an historic increase in enrollment and more demand for spaces available. To the Minister of Child and Family Services, what is our government doing to create more childcare spaces?
Order, order, order. The Honourable the Minister of Children and Family Services.
Well, thank you so much, Mr. Speaker, and thank you to the member for that great question and for being such a tireless advocate for her riding. Mr. Speaker, the member is absolutely correct. Childcare is so important to so many families right across the entire province. As part of my mandate, I'm going to be starting up over 65,000 additional childcare spaces right across the entire province. This is going to make a massive difference for families right across Alberta, Mr. Speaker, and our cost control framework discussions, which are happening right now with a wide breadth of stakeholders, is going to continue to allow us to be able to invest into the system.
Order, order, order. Order, order, order. The Honourable the Member for Livingston-McLeod.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Given that our government fought for the inclusion of private childcare operators in the federal-provincial childcare agreement in order to support our province's unique mixed market system, and given that more than 60% of childcare centres in the province are privately owned and operated, and most Alberta families choose to use privately owned and operating facilities, can the Minister please explain how our government is supporting private operators?
The Honourable the Minister of Children and Family Services.
Well, thank you so much, Mr. Speaker. And on this side of the House, we will never apologize for the incredible work that our entrepreneurs and business owners do to provide incredible childcare spaces for children right across the entire province. That's why, Mr. Speaker, I was very happy about our Space Creation Grant that we just announced about a month or so ago. This is going to unlock over 22,000 additional childcare spaces right across the entire province. Mr. Speaker, our private operators are integral parts of our childcare system. We're not going to apologize for them, unlike the members opposite, who excluded childcare operators on the private side when they did their faulty system.
Order, order. The Honourable Member for Livingston-McLeod.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and through you to the Minister. Given the cost of everything, especially basic needs such as food, rent, and utilities are rising, and families across the province, including those in my own riding, are finding it harder and harder to make ends meet. And given that some parents question whether they can afford to go back to work or take on more work to meet the demands of their children, can the Minister please explain how we are making childcare more accessible and more affordable?
The Honourable the Minister of Children and Community Services.
Well, thank you so much, Mr. Speaker. And Mr. Speaker, the steps that our government has made to save Albertan families has resulted in thousands of dollars of savings for parents right across the entire province. Our arrangement with the federal government has reduced childcare fees by over 50%. Mr. Speaker, if the members opposite were actually concerned about affordability, they would talk to their party leader, Jagmeet Singh, and vote against the carbon tax.
Honourable members, that concludes the time allotted for oral question period. During the Honourable Minister's second response at 2:39, I did note a point of order in which I have indicated now. In 30 seconds or less, we'll continue to the remainder of the daily routine.
The Honourable Member for Red Deer South.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, we are seeing too much hate and contention. A root cause of these tragedies are fogs of lies, blinding minds resulting in great pain and sorrow. Madam Speaker, in a world in commotion, there is hope in truth. The truth always prevails, and we are accountable to live according to it. We can love the truth and trust in it without reservation. Every man and woman is a loved child of God. A correct understanding of this paramount truth is incompatible with hate. An interconnected truth is that families are ordained of God. Family cultures established and maintained on true principles, including love, forgiveness, and work, produce happiness and are powerful defenses to hate and contention. Families are the building block of society and should be supported, as a disintegration of families will bring about the disintegration of society. Schools keeping secrets from parents about children divide and undermine trust. Yet, in seeking to affirm and protect the sacred relationship of parent and child, some seek to frame these desires in a hateful way. It is not right to contend and divide. The sacred relationship of parent and child should be protected and affirmed. All can be valued in seeking fairness for all. While no family or parent is perfect, the vast majority of parents love their children, are responsible to protect them, and should be trusted as we do our best. Let's support families in their sacred stewardships. We will be happier and better. Thank you.
The honourable member for Calgary-Klein has a statement to make.
For the past few months, I've had the opportunity to connect with people in Calgary-Klein at community events, chats at small businesses, phone calls, social media messages, and emails. And the most asked question is, what could happen to their CPP? The most frequent message my constituents want to relay to this government is, keep your hands off my CPP. Folks are understandably concerned about this UCP government's risky moves to take us out of the CPP. Albertans work hard and have a right to safe, secure, and stable retirement. The CPP has provided retirement security for so many already. It's a reliable and secure model that Canadians have come to depend on and trust. Everyone, that is, except for the UCP. It seems like a distant memory, but in the election, when trying to earn the votes of Albertans, the Premier herself said there were no plans to touch pensions, and this was echoed by several of her ministers, often emphatically. And now, sadly, we find ourselves in a place where this government won't look Albertans in the eye. Instead of in-person town halls, they've only taken pre-screened phone calls. They've done a survey that refuses to ask the question that Albertans are keen to answer, which is, do they support leaving the CPP? Adding insult to injury, Albertans are on the hook for a $7.5 million advertising campaign. Fiscal responsibility indeed. While the UCP stirs up numbers that have no basis in fact and otherwise show us that their priorities aren't Albertans' priorities, the Alberta NDP wants to hear how you really feel about your pension. We want to meet you in person. We have a survey that asks the question that the UCP is afraid to. You can fill out the survey or sign up for a real consultation at albertasfuture.ca. And I want Albertans to know, more than anything else, that on this side of the House, we will fight to protect your retirement security and to stop this government from gambling away your pension.
The honourable member for Calgary-Bennington.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Last week was Constituency Week, and I hope that everyone enjoyed their time in their home ridings as much as I did. I spent quite a few hours doing outreach, talking and listening to people in Calgary-Bennington. I was able to meet with a family doctor who lives in my riding. Her practice is holding steady for now, but there are cracks. One doc is retiring 5 years earlier than planned. I spoke with a small business owner. His business is doing really well. He lives comfortably, which hasn't always been the case for him. You know, he didn't want to talk about taxes. No, he wanted to talk about coal mining. His family work land that relies on water from the eastern slopes. I talked to a new teacher. We talked about Gaga Ball, and how awesome it is to watch kids have all those light bulb, aha, I get it moments. We talked about how some classrooms just gel. You can have great years of easy connections and learning. Some years, it's not so easy. I talked to some experienced teachers. They said there's more and more of those not so easy years lately. I talked to a healthcare worker. She used some interesting language to describe her thoughts on the AHS reshuffle, rearranging deck chairs on the Titanic. She wanted to know, where's the plan for new docs, new nurses? Where's the plan to retain the ones we've got? What didn't I hear about this week? Raising salaries for people on agencies, boards, and commissions, raising gift limit amounts for MLAs. You know, not a single person approached me looking for an Alberta pension plan. My constituents in Calgary-Beddington don't agree with this government's priorities. They don't want to leave the CPP. They don't want to line the pockets of your Conservative buddies. They want real action to address the cost of living crisis created by this government, and they deserve nothing less.
Presenting reports by standing and special committees. Presenting petitions. Notices of motions. Introduction bills.
The Honourable the Member for Leduc Beaumont.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'm proud to rise today to request leave to introduce Bill 204, Municipal Government National Urban Parks Amendment Act 2023. The purpose of this bill is to protect the role of the provincial government and prevent federal overreach. Current circumstances have seen the federal government work directly with municipalities on the National Urban Parks Initiative. If passed, this bill will ensure that no national urban park can be created in Albertans' backyard without their input. I look forward to discussing this bill with members of this House.
Honourable members, the member for Leduc Beaumont has moved first reading of Bill 204, Municipal Government National Urban Parks Amendment Act 2023. Does the Assembly agree to the motion for first reading? If so, please say aye. Aye. Any opposed, please say no. My opinion, the ayes have it. That motion is carried and so ordered.
Bill 204, Municipal Government National Urban Parks Amendment Act 2023 is now read a first time. Tabling returns and reports.
The Honourable Member for Sherwood Park has a tabling.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'm tabling the requisite number of copies. Recently, a 19-year-old in Sherwood Park overdosed and died from addiction. I'm tabling a letter from a constituent requesting financial help from the government so they can afford for their child to finish their addiction recovery in the new Westminster facility.
The member for Banff-Kananaskis has a tabling.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Yesterday, the Minister of Energy suggested I Google where Grassy Mountain Mine is on the eastern slopes, and so I did. I'd like to table the requisite copies of maps that I pulled from the Alberta government website. One is of the eastern slopes boundary, one is from the eastern slopes policy, and another is from the Alberta Wilderness Association detailing the location of the mine. Thank you. On the eastern slopes. Sorry.
Okay. Are there other tablings? Seeing none,
Know that I'm short.
My apologies. Had nothing to do with your stature. The Honourable the member for Livingston McLeod has a tabling.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. It is my pleasure to rise and table the requisite 5 copies of the LEAP Manifesto. The NDP Socialist Caucus is one of the main signatories. This document calls for an end to fossil fuels, higher corporate taxes, and a progressive carbon tax.
I'm sure the former member for Bonnyville Cold Lake will be proud of you. Are there others? Seeing none, I do have a tabling pursuant to Section 33(1) of the Public Interest Disclosure Whistleblower Protection Act. I'm tabling 6 copies of the annual report of the Office of the Public Interest Commissioner covering the period from April 1, 2022 to March 31st, 2023.
Tablings to the Clerk. I wish to advise the Assembly that the following documents were deposited with the Office of the Clerk. On behalf of Honourable Mr. Horner, President of Treasury Board and Minister of Finance, pursuant to the Conflicts of Interest Act and Legislative Assembly Act. Report of selected payments to the members and former members of the Legislative Assembly and persons directly associated with members of the Legislative Assembly for the year ended March 31, 2023. On behalf of Honourable Mr. Wilson, Minister of Indigenous Relations, pursuant to the Métis Settlements Act, Métis Settlements Appeal Tribunal 2022 Annual Report.
On behalf of Honourable Mr. Jones, Minister of Jobs, Economy and Trade, pursuant to the Northern Alberta Development Council Act, Alberta Development Council Act 2022-23 Annual Report.
Honourable, go ahead.
Deferred divisions.
Honourable members, we are at points of order, and at 1:53, the official opposition House Leader rose on a point of order.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. At 1:53, the Leader of the Official Opposition was in a debate with the Premier regarding, during the election, the commitment the UCP made that they were not going to debate the Alberta pension plan because it was not a significant election issue, and that matter of debate arose. Now, in this chamber, we've had a number of rulings about not being able to call someone a liar. So under 23HI and J, I do not have the benefit of the blues, but I heard the Premier say the member was untruthful. Now, you've said many times, Mr. Speaker, you cannot do indirectly what you cannot do directly. That seems pretty direct to me. I believe that was directly calling the Leader of the Official Opposition a liar, which is unparliamentary, and I ask that the Premier apologize and withdraw.
The Government House Leader.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I appreciate the opportunity to rebut the member opposite's point of order. I believe this is a matter of debate. Certainly, a lot is said during election campaigns, and that has clearly funneled its way into this chamber. Whether what the member of the opposition, leader of the opposition, said or didn't say during the campaign was or was not truthful, I think is up for debate. And I will say that Albertans decided for us, right, who they believed was telling the truth. And I think that the voters got it right, Mr. Speaker. So, Mr. Speaker, I don't think that that's untruthful. The polls are pretty clear. And I don't think this is a point of order, but rather a matter of debate.
Right. Are there others? Fortunately for the Government House Leader, you cannot be more wrong. Because the Honourable Premier said the following. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The member opposite during the campaign was untruthful with Albertans about what was happening with their pension discussion. Debate continued, and unfortunately, or fortunately, on June 3rd, 2021, I ruled in which case, Mr. Speaker, the member opposite knows very well that what he's saying is absolutely untrue. I proceeded to say that for that, this is a point of order in which I'll encourage the member to withdraw and apologize. Again, on the 24th of November, a very similar point of order. I've provided lots of comment, and in fact, the Leader of the Opposition went on to say the government was untruthful, which in her remarks wasn't a point of order, but because the Premier made the allegation that the Leader of the Opposition was untruthful, it is a point of order of which the Government House Leader can apologize and withdraw.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I still believe the voters got it right, but today I got it wrong. I apologize and withdraw.
Excellent apology. Not that I judge apologies, but that was a good one. I consider the matter dealt with and concluded. At approximately 2:39, the Government House Leader rose on a point of order.
I most certainly did, Mr. Speaker. At the time you had mentioned, I believe that I heard the member from Edmonton Whitemud say to the Honourable Minister of Seniors, Community Social Services, you're a misogynist. Mr. Speaker, this language is certainly unparliamentary for this chamber. Now, I suspect that it didn't get picked up by the ambient microphones, and that's understandable. But I do believe it's really important to draw attention to this kind of language in the chamber, which is routine for the member for Edmonton Whitemud, Mr. Speaker. Whether it's the questions that member asked today in the chamber that I felt were totally out of line, or using introductions of guests to politicize an issue rather than introduce someone who's come from your constituency just to watch the daily proceedings, Mr. Speaker. I believe that member needs to improve her decorum in this chamber, including picking better language when referring to someone across the aisle, Mr. Speaker. Calling someone a misogynist, I believe, is wildly inappropriate, and that member should apologize.
The Honourable the Official Opposition House Leader.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, the government regularly uses introduction of guests to score political points, so I don't know why the Government House Leader is raising that in this particular item. As well, the member from Edmonton Whitemud
had a family with a serious medical concern with our healthcare system and was advocating on their behalf, that the government House Leader would attempt to shame her for doing that work on behalf of an Alberta family, again, I do not see as relevant to this point of order debate, and I do not know why he's entered that in. I did not hear the member for Edmonton Whitemud heckle any such thing to the government, and I do not have the blues at my disposal in order to weigh in on this. I did not hear it, Mr. Speaker. I do not think that it occurred, but I defer to your ruling.
Are there others? Seeing none, I am prepared to rule. And in this particular case, I will say this, and I appreciate that it is a Thursday, and oftentimes the excitement and vigor of the debate reaches a peak on Thursday afternoon prior to members having the opportunity to return to their constituents. And I would say that today was just that. And the farthest third of the Assembly from the Speaker was very, very animated. And I would encourage members, just because they're far away from the Speaker doesn't mean that their decorum should reflect that. I'm certain that inappropriate things were said from both sides of the Assembly. While I didn't hear the particular allegation, if she did say it, she should apologize. And I also did not hear all of the remarks that were made by members on the opposite side of the House. It is not possible without an accurate record, either in Hansard, the benefit of the blues, or otherwise, for the Speaker to make a ruling on something he did or did not hear. In this case, this is not a point of order, but I encourage all members to ensure they're using parliamentary language at all times in the Assembly. I consider this matter dealt with and concluded, and we are at orders of the day, orders du jour.
Consideration of Her Honour the Lieutenant Governor's speech. Adjourned debate. Member Beaupre.
Honourable members, are there others? Seeing none. On the motion as proposed by the Honourable Member for Camrose and seconded by the Honourable Member for Leduc-Beaumont, all those in favour of the motion, please say aye. Aye. Any opposed, please say no. No. In my opinion, the ayes have it. That motion is carried and so ordered.
Government Motion 11.
The Honourable the Government House Leader.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. On behalf of the Honourable Premier, I rise to move Government Motion 11 on the order paper. Be it resolved that the address in reply to the speech from the throne be engrossed and presented to Her Honour the Lieutenant Governor by such members of the Assembly as are members of Executive Council.
Honourable members, pursuant to Standing Order 18.1a, this is a debatable motion, Government Motion 11. Is there anyone wishing to provide question, comments, or debate? Seeing none, I am prepared to call the question. All those in favour of Government Motion 11, as proposed by the Honourable Government House Leader on behalf of the Premier, President of Executive Council, and the Minister of Intergovernment Relations, all those in favour, please say aye. Aye. Any opposed, please say no. In my opinion, the ayes have it. That motion is carried and so ordered.
Government Bills and Orders for third reading. Bill 3, Opioid Damages and Healthcare Costs Recovery Amendment Act 2023. Honourable Mr. Williams.
The Honourable the Minister of Mental Health and Addiction.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'm honoured to rise to move third reading of Bill 3 in this chamber, the Opioid Damages Healthcare Costs Recovery Amendment Act 2023. I'd like to first thank every single member that has voted unanimously thus far, as I know, in consent at second reading Committee of the Whole. And now we move on to the third stage of the debate of the legislation in third reading, which is debate on the details and final debate of the legislation as it stands after committee. Although the legislation is technical, it is important that we look at the impacts of a high and continuous pharmaceutical-grade supply of opioids into our community and the crisis it creates in our lives, in our communities, to our healthcare system, to our province, and to our institutions that are meant to care for the most vulnerable. we will not, as a province, allow a pharmaceutical company, those who work with those companies in marketing, distribution, wholesaling, to continue to get away with false representations of the dangers of these deadly and addictive drugs that they push. Mr. Speaker, we see it again here today that it is important for us to recognize the truth of what a continuous supply of opioids would do to our communities. If we go back and look at what caused our crisis in the late 90s and early 2000s, we can see the claims that they made about drugs like oxycodone 25 years ago. The pharmaceutical industry claimed, one, that they are legally produced, clearly labeled opioids are going to be a low-risk medication. Two, they claim that being concerned about the risk of opioids is fear-mongering and a denial of, quote, the evidence. Number three, Mr. Speaker, they claim that public health would benefit from an increased distribution and easy access to a supply of opioids. And number four, Mr. Speaker, they claim that these drugs would be consistently taken as directed and only by the individuals to whom they were prescribed, i.e., there is no diversion. Well, Mr. Speaker, we know that was not the case, and that is why we are here on third reading of Bill 3 today. The damages, instead, Mr. Speaker, were incredible and in so many ways immeasurable. The damages to our communities, to the lives lost, to the lives consumed, to the agony of addiction and the living hell that captures an individual in, where because of an opioid addiction, an individual chooses not to eat, not to sleep, instead losing up to a quarter of their body weight because the dopamine they get from addiction of that opioid is more compelling than the basic requirement of sleeping and eating to live. Mr. Speaker, the grip that this addiction had on so many Albertans, some of whom, thank God, every day we must thank Him for their lives being saved through recovery, and some of whom we pray for their souls because they lost their life to this deadly disease. The tragedy, Mr. Speaker, and the reason we must pursue this legislation is because the threat is not over. This is not merely a question of history. The reason that we have an obligation as legislators to move forward on this bill and this class action lawsuit that we're participating in, and these certification hearings that come up starting at the end of November and again in February, is because we must set an expectation of what is an appropriate, moral, and proper response to a pharmaceutical company and industry that works with these deadly disease drugs of addiction. Mr. Speaker, today we see this repeating again in the Lower Mainland of Vancouver with the so-called safe supply, where a high-powered continuous stream of opioids, this time not twice as powerful as street heroin, but 5 times as powerful as street heroin, is being pumped into our communities. It's being pumped not just through the drug companies, Mr. Speaker, but through the governments responsible for caring for the most vulnerable. And these governments are the ones saying that they have an obligation to care for the vulnerable. Well, at the same time, to the addiction crisis, their response is to hand out approximately 18 million hydromorphone pills annually. That has depressed the price of hydromorphone, or also known as Dilaudid or Dilly on the street, to the degree of it used to be sold approximately for $15 a pill on the black market, now 15 cents a pill, Mr. Speaker. It is difficult to explain the consequences of what that means for public health and for the deadly disease of addiction coming forward. And Mr. Speaker, unlike the claims that they made in the early 2000s and that we see again happening now, it is not that these high-powered pharmaceutical-grade opioids are consistently being taken as directed to whom they were prescribed. The truth is, Mr. Speaker, they're being diverted, and they are likely being diverted en masse. And they are likely being diverted en masse outside of that jurisdiction in Vancouver. Unfortunately, Mr. Speaker, it's likely that they have made their way into other communities in Alberta, into the party scene on college campuses, into high schools, as they're told the dillies are safe, as they're told the dillies are part of a safe supply of drugs. Mr. Speaker, creating more addicts does not address the addiction crisis happening in our country. Only recovery can do that, which is why this government has taken a different tack than we see in the Vancouver model. We have said that every single life has dignity in Alberta, and we believe every single one of these individuals deserve the right to recovery, and we're going to move forward continuously. We've built, in our time, over 10,240 new treatment spaces. That includes detox and long-term treatment in our province. We have distributed over 660,000 naloxone kits since we got into government. We have obviously continued to move forward with the recovery centres in the Alberta model, where we are building 11 recovery centres, 4 of which already are committed to be on Indigenous First Nations land. And of course, we have 2 up and running. Those 2, both of which I've visited, both of which I've spoken to the individuals in it, and they thanked me. And I have no role to play in this. I thank those predecessors who went before me as the minister. I thank Premier Kenny, Premier Kenny, yes, and our current Premier for the work that they have done moving forward this model of recovery. Because the lives are being saved, not because we hand drugs out to those who suffer from addiction, but because we get them off of the drugs, into recovery, into treatment, and living a second lease on life. Mr. Speaker, we've eliminated the $1,240 fee that the NDP left in an expectation to have addicts find this somehow in their need for treatment. The one thing that can save their life, the only thing that can save their life from addiction is treatment, and we remove that happily, trying to break down any barrier that any Albertan has in their path towards recovery and living again as a full member of their community and family, and those who participate and volunteer and go to work and have a social and common life in their communities again. Mr. Speaker, the truth is, if we don't move forward with this legislation and we don't move forward with this model, we see nothing but more and more carnage, pain, and harm coming to Albertans daily. It is a crisis in front of us, and a mountain we must climb. And I'm very grateful to see members of my team and members opposite supporting this legislation, and I hope and pray supporting the Alberta recovery model, because too many lives depend that we move forward with this and don't look back towards a facilitation of drug addiction, but instead a moving over and around the community so that we can come to recovery for every Albertan. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Just to clarify, Minister, did you move third reading at the beginning of your speech?
I did at the beginning.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Thank you. Are there others wishing to speak? Member from Tabor Warner has risen.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. It's an honor to rise in support of Bill 3, Opioid Damages and Healthcare Recovery Amendment Act. Mr. Speaker, I could tell this House of, or talk about the opioid manufacturers and wholesale distributors and marketing representatives misrepresenting the harmful effects and addictive nature of medication. I could talk about the high rate of opioid prescriptions led to a significant increase of addiction and overdose rates. I could talk about the devastation in the numbers, the statistics. But instead, Mr. Speaker, I want to talk about 2 individuals who were friends of mine. I want to tell you about a childhood friend to both myself and my younger brother, Dale, his name is Ron Smart. And Ron had a ready smile, Mr. Speaker. He had an effervescent laugh that could light up the room. And one day, Ron, good kid, decided that he was going to go and dabble in, and he took a hit of acid. That affected him, infected his mind at that age. Ron went from being one of the smartest kids I knew to being drug-induced schizophrenic. He went from being able to have a life with a love of his, children, family, travel, the things that we all enjoy and benefit from in a society as great as we have, to having to live in a institution. At one point, Mr. Speaker, through not just depression, but from the problems that he had with his mind, he jumped out of a window 6 stories high and killed himself because he thought he could fly. That was the end of a childhood friend for myself and my younger brother. And to this day, after many years, I still think about what Ron Smart's life would have been like if he hadn't done that. But more importantly, I think about the important principle that's been presented in this House, and that is that no drugs are good. Drugs do not help. We need to help get them off. And we need to make sure that they don't even get onto it, because, Mr. Speaker, if just one person, my friend Ron Smart, could have one hit, do it one time, and have this happen to him, my message to all young people is to just don't do it. I want to tell you about another person. I won't give a name, Mr. Speaker, but I will tell you of a person who had some health issues because of childbirth, because of giving birth to children, and was struggling with pain and some issues, and went to the doctor and got prescribed 222s, which is codeine. Got addicted to codeine because of the ability that they had at the time to be able to just prescribe more, and he learned to use the system to the point where she was actually taking handfuls of 222s at a time. That was the addiction that she suffered from. Luckily, she got off of that, but she became drug-induced schizophrenic because of that as well. That was the diagnosis for her. Now, I will say that because of her relationship to God, she was able to actually get off, and it was an okay situation. But at the end of the day, Mr. Speaker, it actually killed her. That actually killed her. Now, it's interesting because I tell you those two stories because in our Canadian Bill of Rights, it says this: the Parliament of Canada affirming that the Canadian nation is founded upon principles that acknowledge the supremacy of God, the dignity and worth of the human person, and the possession of the family in a society of free men and free institutions. I want to restate what this point is that it says the dignity and worth of the human person. This is the crux of this whole argument we're talking about, Mr. Speaker. I hear often terms used, safe injection or compassionate care, or it is about the individual person that our Constitution and our Bill of Rights seem to understand was so important. We need to get back to knowing that it's individuals, it's not numbers. It's not about us being able to decrease it by 10% or 5% or prolong the life of an individual. This is about having that person have dignity. And Mr. Speaker, this is why I think it's important for us to support this bill, to make sure that those unscrupulous individuals who used profit or made profit more important than an individual, that they pay for what they did and pay for that type of mentality. And this is why I'm in support of this bill, and I hope all members of this House will do the same.
Are there any others wishing to speak? The Honourable Minister of Mental Health and Addictions to close debate. The Honourable Minister of Mental Health and Addiction has moved third reading of Bill 3, Opioid Damages in Healthcare Costs Recovery Amendment Act 2023. Those in favour of the motion for third reading, please say aye. Aye. Any opposed? The motion is carried.
Bill 3, Opioid Damages and Healthcare Costs Recovery Amendment Act 2023 is now read a third time. Under Government Bills and Orders for third reading, Bill 4, Tax Statutes Amendment Act 2023, Honourable Mr. Horner.
Government House Leader?
Yes, Mr. Speaker. Indeed it is me. Yes. Gotta hobble up in here. Boot. Mr. Speaker, thank you. I am pleased to move third reading of Bill 4, the Tax Statutes Amendment Act 2023 on behalf of the Honourable Minister of Finance and President of the Treasury Board. Bill 4 proposes legislative amendments that would help formalize a key part of Alberta's commitment to affordability, provide clarity around the collection and remittance of Alberta's tourism levy, and update a number of technical and administrative aspects of Alberta's tax system. Keeping our tax legislation up to date is essential to maintaining Alberta's low tax environment and minimizing red tape. Specifically, Mr. Speaker, Bill 4 would amend 4 pieces of legislation, including the Fuel Tax Act, the Tourism Levy Act, the Alberta Personal Income Tax Act, and the Alberta Corporate Tax Act. This includes legislation, the extension of the provincial, or rather, this includes extending the legislation, provincial fuel tax pause to the end of this year, a decision we announced earlier this year. Extending the pause to the end of the year saves drivers an estimated $530 million, Mr. Speaker. I repeat, that's a lot of money, $530 mil. That's money that's staying in Albertans' pockets every time they fill up their vehicle. If passed, Bill 4 will also align Alberta's tourism levy with administrative practices by repealing requirements for the collection and remittance of the tourism levy by online brokers, such as Airbnb and VRBO, that were intended to come off effective July 1st of this year. In response to industry concerns, our government is working with industry partners on how to best implement the requirement for online brokers to collect and remit tax on behalf of operators, a change we first announced in Budget 2022. This legislation includes a framework to collect the tax with specific details to follow the regulation. This new framework would take effect on proclamation on a date to be later announced. Online brokers will only be required to collect and remit the levy on bookings made on their platforms after the changes take effect. For bookings made prior to this effective date, short-term rentals hosts continue to be required to collect and remit the tourism levy applicable to the rental of their property, as they have been since April 1st, 2021. Alberta's tax administrators have continued to work with the industry since July 1st to ensure all parties understand their current tourism levy obligations. Revenue from the tourism levy goes into the province's general revenue fund to support the programs and services that make Alberta such an attractive place to live, visit, and raise a family. It's tourism. If passed, Bill 4 will also make technical amendments to the Alberta Personal Income Tax and the Alberta Corporate Tax Act to reflect existing provincial policy and align with changes to the federal legislation. Mr. Speaker, we review and update Alberta's tax laws regularly to legislate new policies, correct deficiencies, and maintain consistency between provincial and federal tax laws. These types of changes are important for maintaining the integrity of our tax system in Alberta. And I encourage all members in this to support this bill today. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And with that, I move third reading of Bill 4, Tax Statutes Amendment Act.
Are there any others wishing to speak to Bill 4? Deputy House or House Leader, Government House Leader, to close debate.
Well, I think I just said everything I needed to say, Mr. Speaker. But with that, I do encourage all members of this chamber to support Bill 4. With that, I close debate.
The Honourable President of Treasury Board and Minister of Finance, actually the Minister of Tourism and Sport, has moved on behalf of the Honourable President of Treasury Board and Minister of Finance. Third reading of Bill 4, Tax Statutes Amendment Act 2023. Those in favour of the motion for third reading, please say aye. Aye. Those opposed, no. The motion is carried.
Bill 4, Tax Statutes Amendment Act 2023 is now read a third time. Under Government Bills and Orders, for second reading, Bill 2, Alberta Pension Protection Act Debate adjourned. Ms. Hayter speaking.
Any others wishing to speak? The member for Edmonton Riverview has risen.
Well, thank you, Mr. Speaker. It's my pleasure to join the debate on Bill 2, the Alberta Pension Protection Act, it's called. In reality, it really isn't about protecting anything. It's creating much risk for Albertans. And certainly it's kind of a bill that has been brought to the legislature by this government to that no one asked for. And it seems to be part of what the Premier's ongoing fight with the federal government is about. Even in the throne speech that we heard on October 30th, she just talks about the, I guess, the signature bill of this sitting, which is the Sovereignty Within a United Canada Act. And she talks about, it's going to detail initiatives and legislation necessary to protect Albertans from unconstitutional practices. So certainly I'm very proud to be Canadian, and of course I'm proud to be Albertan, and I think that I've heard from hundreds of Albertans, constituents, regarding this particular bill that's before us, Bill 2, that they do not want to leave the Canada Pension Plan. In fact, the Canada Pension Plan is a very reliable, stable fiscal tool that we have in this country that's been around for over 5 decades, that's supported Canadians to retire in dignity, and it supports them to be able to know that they will have support in their retirement. And this move by the Premier and the government to put this really at risk for Albertans is concerning. And I'm not only saying that, many Albertans have approached me and talked to me about that. And as the critic for seniors, it affects seniors, but of course it affects generations to come, because if Alberta pulls out, then they will be impacted. And this isn't a simple process. This is a process that will take years to implement, and it's really it doesn't make any sense that it's being done, because we know we have a very stable situation as it is. And so it's really important that the Premier, the UCP government, listen to Albertans. And certainly we in the opposition have been listening to Albertans, and we have had town halls, in-person town halls. My colleagues have spoken about that already, and we have several more coming up where we will spend time listening to Albertans. I mean, we know that there's been an online consultation process that the government has undertaken, but there's so few people who have an opportunity actually to speak that really it's not a fair consultation. People can't really be heard in those settings. And certainly we all know that in those kind of processes, there can be very rigorous vetting of who gets to actually speak anyway. And oftentimes, you know, I would say that the government has controlled the narrative so that people who do speak are generally people who are also supporting what they want to do. And I just want to go back a bit to sort of what I have heard from my constituents, and one of the big things that I've heard is that they care about other Canadians. They don't only care about themselves. They have relatives, they have friends all across this country. And really, they see themselves as not wanting to, you know, create some jeopardy for the Canada Pension Plan, that they want to continue with the process that it is that we use right now for our national pension plan. And myself, I was born in Manitoba. I moved here when I was 6, so I've certainly been an Albertan for many decades. But, you know, I have many relatives. You know, I'm Icelandic heritage. There's lots of Icelanders in Winnipeg and Gimli, where my father was born. So those are all people I care about. And Alberta pulling out of the pension is, I don't think, a good idea for the stability of the Canadian pension plan. And certainly, I have relatives in BC, Saskatchewan, Ontario. So I have many people that I know, and my constituents say that too. And we know that that's a key issue with the Alberta pension plan suggestion, and we're still really kind of confused as to what that will really look like. We don't have any clear details about that. But how portable will that be? You know, certainly that's part of what we value as Canadian citizens, is we can go from province to province and receive supports like health care and other programs in other provinces. And, you know, the Alberta pension plan is really specifically for Albertans. So that may cause us difficulties when we do retire because, you know, maybe we can't take it with us. So there's so many unanswered questions regarding the Alberta pension plan that, you know, it's really, I think, kind of unfair that the government is asking us to consider this when we don't really know how it's all going to come about. And certainly...
Intervention for me?
Yes?
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I rise to ask the member for Edmonton Riverview a couple of things about what she's heard in relation to Canada Pension Plan being exited in favour of an Alberta pension plan. During consultations she's had with her constituents in Edmonton Riverview, I know that the member will be participating in a direct in-person town hall with regards to pension on December the 11th with 4 other MLAs, including myself, at the West End Seniors Activities Centre. And we anticipate, of course, a very large turnout, as have been the case with other pension town halls that have been held in person by New Democrat MLAs so far. And the member directly has questioned the need for the change or the elimination of the Canada Pension Plan. And so far, the government has given telephone town halls only and offered no opportunities to people to answer a direct question regarding whether or not they really want to get rid of the Canada Pension Plan. Our in-person town halls will certainly be dealing with that question directly. And also, I'd like the member perhaps to comment on the survey that we've done on our side of the House, where 37,000 respondents overwhelmingly rejected the notion of getting rid of the Canada Pension Plan, saying that they're certainly not asking for it, and they fear that they're going to lose the benefits of a very solid, reputable pension.
Well, thank you very much to the honourable member for the questions, and certainly, as he has and I have and all members of this NDP caucus have heard from so many Albertans concerned about some of the things I've already talked about. Just the instability of Alberta pension plan, the lack of portability, the you know, when we're dealing with a much smaller population with the workers contributing in a smaller smaller amount compared with a national program. Like, I think the CPP currently applies to a labour force of about almost 16 million. So that's 16 million workers. So it's a huge plan, whereas Alberta's pension plan would apply to a provincial labour force of 2.5 million. And so we know in these, in these large pension funds, the larger the fund, the more stability. And there's less risk, and it makes it about 1/6 as large as the Canada Pension Plan, the Alberta Pension Plan would be, based on our population and, the workers in our province. We know that the CPP is a large, stable, secure contribution group, and it is much less risky than the Alberta pension plan that's being proposed by the UCP government. The more funds you have to invest, the less risk there is. They can diversify their investments. We know that it's much more secure if you have an opportunity to invest in different areas, because sometimes one area is up and others down. And so when you have a larger pool of money and funds, then you can have a lower financial risk. So I've heard repeatedly from Albertans very concerned about this. And as I've said already, you know, sometimes people when they're retired, they do leave Alberta. They might go to BC. They might go to another province in Canada. And just the uncertainty about what is going to happen when they move to another province. There's no clarity. I've heard nothing from the UCP regarding about the portability. How can Albertans be supported no matter where they are? And I just want to talk about a myth that's certainly being generated by some of the information the UCP puts forward, and it's just saying that Albertans are subsidizing the Canada Pension Plan for the rest of the country. But it's not what's happening. Of course, if you have a higher income, then you have a higher contribution. But that is why it is important to understand how it actually works. So this is not, it doesn't mean that we're subsidizing the rest of the provinces. It makes no sense at all. I mean, another, I think, significant issue is that certainly the Alberta pension plan, although the Premier has talked about it, certainly pre-election she talked about it, but during the election she was silent on this. And, I mean, you have to ask, why would that be? If this is such a flagship legislation, it's Bill 2 of our first session as a new, new constellation after the election. Why is it that she would not have been transparent about this during the election and not speak about that? And it's because it's not popular. It's not what Albertans wanted. And sadly, she was able to fool Albertans to think that that wasn't a priority for her. But it's very clearly a priority because it's not Bill 1, but it's Bill 2. It's very close to being the top of the heap in what is important to the Premier and this UCP government. So you would think, a leader with integrity, with wanting to be honest and straightforward with where they want to go in their leadership, they would have talked about this. But the Premier was silent on this during the election, and that disturbs me. I think that that's something that both of us on both sides of the House would agree with. We think that transparency is a value of a democracy. I've certainly heard repeatedly from my colleagues in the government side saying how important it is for us to be clear and open, have dialogues. They care very much about democracy. Well, this is just kind of flies in the face of that, I guess, because this is certainly a hidden aspect that even though it is like a flagship bill, it was not discussed at all by the Premier during the election. So, I question how much they are actually caring about democracy and really wanting to fulfill on that and make sure that Albertans know what they're advocating for. So besides, it being obviously a risky business to pull Alberta out of the Canada Pension Plan and the lack of clarity regarding how it's going to work for Albertans. And certainly we know that the government is using government money to advertise and promote this legislation, and that the survey that they did really doesn't even ask that question, do you want to be in or do you want to be out of the Canada Pension Plan? It's not objective questions, it's certainly leading, I don't know, from where I sit, it doesn't feel like a fair process, and Albertans are just being convinced through millions and millions of advertising dollars by the government, by their own money, really, the tax that they pay, that, this is a good idea for Albertans. But Albertans in my estimation, are pretty smart, and they can see that it is not a good idea, and that certainly I've heard repeatedly from my constituents, other Albertans across the province, and will continue to, because we are going to have in-person town halls to discuss this with Albertans and to really hear their concerns. And we know that many groups have spoken out against this, Alberta pension plan. And, some of the people who, sometimes you think they would align more with a Conservative government. But Calgary Chamber of Commerce, members of the Alberta Chamber of Commerce, the Business Council of Canada, the Canadian Federation of Independent Business, all of these business leaders are saying it's a bad idea. It's a bad idea. They don't want it to go ahead. So, usually the UCP listens to these groups, and it's kind of interesting that they're ignoring them on this particular issue. So I think, I really commend the members opposite to listen to Albertans in a sincere way and listen to these stakeholders, business stakeholders who are expressing concern, and the significant risk that this is creating can create for Albertans. It's really important that I think the government needs to take this seriously and decide to stop this legislation, because it is not in the best interest of Albertans, and it's not what Albertans want. There's nobody telling me they want to pull out of the CPP. Albertans want to be part of the Canada Pension Plan, and they are happy that it's a secure place for Albertans for decades. So I commend all the members in this House to vote against this bill. It is not in the best interest of Albertans, and certainly that is the way I'll be voting. And with that, Mr. Speaker, I'll step down.
The member for Red Deer South has risen.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I stand in favour of Bill 2, the Alberta Pension Protection Act. Mr. Speaker, this is a super-duper bill. A1, one of the best I've ever seen since serving in this legislature. Mr. Speaker, there is a lot of misinformation and fear-mongering that we've had to endure from the members opposite, unfortunately, about an Alberta pension plan. And why that's very unfortunate is that this undermines and works against what's actually in the best interests of Albertans. It's important, our stewardship is to confront lies with the truth. And Mr. Speaker, I want to talk about some truths. So probably a paramount truth, Mr. Speaker, is that an Alberta pension plan will create and produce a game-changing competitive advantage for all Alberta businesses and workers that will save billions of dollars each year for them, will improve affordability, our economic competitiveness, and position us to increase pension benefits for Alberta retirees. And Mr. Speaker, that is actually the truth. Now, Mr. Speaker, I want to talk about some things a little bit more in detail, and I don't know if I'll have enough time to go through everything, so perhaps I will have the opportunity to speak on this later on. But I certainly want to talk about a few important things. So one of the things that seems to be in dispute is the asset transfer provision in the CPP. Now, just kind of a little bit of a history lesson. When the CPP was formed, Ontario was actually concerned that they were going to have to subsidize the rest of the other provinces, and they actually insisted, as I understand it, on having this asset transfer provision in and a mechanism to withdraw from the CPP. Mr. Speaker, I'm going to summarize the asset provision as follows. Albertans get their money back. Hear, hear. If you boil it down, that's actually what it is. Albertans can get their money back. Now, under this asset transfer provision, Alberta is placed in the same position if, like Quebec, it chose to operate its own provincial pension plan from the outset. So that is actually what the legislation says. And there's a lot of fear-mongering and lying about that. Here's another thing where we see a lot of fear-mongering and lying, Mr. Speaker, is as we all know here, Quebec has its own provincial pension plan, and there are portability rules that apply when workers move into or retire outside of Quebec. Alberta would have the same mechanisms. They can do the same. So, Mr. Speaker, this is not rocket science. So when the members opposite raise this as an issue, they are fear-mongering and misrepresenting what's already been formed and created in terms of portability with the Quebec pension plan. So the other important thing is that LifeWorks, the independent professional actuarial company, one of the largest in the country, independent, used the CPP's own available numbers to arrive at an estimated asset transfer number of $277 billion up to 2021. And that is found in Table B1A of the report. And I would invite the members opposite to actually look at it, maybe try and understand it, instead of just fear-mongering and just basically recycling their sound bites. LifeWorks extrapolated those results in 2021 to 2027 to arrive at an estimated $338 billion asset transfer number. Now, Mr. Speaker, what about the dissenters? Let's talk a little bit about them. So are we supposed to be surprised that some do not want an Alberta pension plan for Albertans? And Mr. Speaker, it really comes down to this. If Alberta saves billions every year with their own APP, Alberta businesses and workers are not having to provide billions to the rest of the country, and Albertans are in the position to provide more pension benefits to Alberta retirees. So watch the dissenters avoiding this truth. They always talk about risk and fear-mongering, but they don't actually kind of confront the hard fact that Alberta businesses and workers stand to save billions of dollars each year and increase benefits to Alberta retirees. And Mr. Speaker, that's why we're doing this. That is why it's a priority of this government. Alberta is a land of freedom and prosperity. We are the best. And with the storm clouds that are approaching, the macroeconomic storm clouds that are approaching, and I'm going to talk a little bit more about this, but we have a stewardship and a duty to make sure that we position Alberta to enjoy the prosperity that we've enjoyed, to have that same prosperity for our children. Now, Mr. Speaker, the Premier of Quebec has said that one of his favorite things about Canada was equalization. So is that what it means to be a Canadian? To be preyed upon by parasitic politicians? Why does Alberta always have to subsidize the rest of the country? And Mr. Speaker, I'm going to tell you this truth. If Quebec was Alberta, they would have separated long ago. We have been the rainmaker for this rigged partnership for decades. And that is the truth, in the amount of hundreds of billions of dollars. Now, Mr. Speaker.
Intervention.
Yes.
Yeah, thank you to the honourable member. So again, the act that we're bringing in here, we're talking about the Alberta Pension Plan and putting protective measures in place for those that are following along at home to ensure that any payments that they make will be lesser than or equal to. Any of the income they'd be getting off of this would be greater than or equal to. So again, putting up those guardrails. I've been listening intently to the member. He's very passionate about this. He also comes from an area of expertise. I myself am not a tax lawyer. I myself am not an accountant. But maybe the member could also advise what he did in his professional life and still does in his professional life versus as his legislative role, and why he can offer some of these insights that might help a lot of us here understand better the reports that have been presented and made public for a long time, and why there shouldn't be a lot of the concerns being brought up from the member or from the opposition.
Thank you for that question, and actually I would like to address that. And I was planning to address that a little bit later, but I'm going to address it now to provide some context. So, Mr. Speaker, and I'm really excited to get back to some other things I want to say, but I want to talk about this. So in 2019, basically Trudeau started jacking up CPP contribution rates. And Mr. Speaker, he has really jacked them up. So since about 2019, Trudeau has actually jacked up CPP over 36%. Forcing Alberta businesses and workers to disproportionately pay for his tax increase because we are the rainmaker partner, frankly, in Canada. That's just the truth. But Mr. Speaker, the members opposite, they shriek and screech all the time about cost of living and affordability. Well, let's talk about inflation, Mr. Speaker. So did you know that CPP costs exploded more than 7% from last year, the year prior more than 11%, and then 9% in 2021. So we have this out of control inflationary cost. And we talk about affordability.
I just wanted the member to elaborate on what the tangible impacts of our net contributions to the pension plan mean for Albertans. So in a year when we make a $3 billion net contribution to CPP, that would mean approximately $4,000 in benefit to our 750,000 seniors in 1 year. That's the potential. I think that alone is worthy of exploration. I think the member would agree and can talk about the tangible impacts it could make in the lives of Albertans dealing with our seniors, dealing with affordability challenges. And he was talking about the members opposite and how they oppose Alberta seeking fairness. And I think there's kind of a trend there because they're fine with mechanisms that take things from Albertans and give them only a portion back. They set up a carbon tax which did just that. And even today, they continue to support a federal carbon tax that takes resources from Albertans and gives them only a portion back. So I think I'd like the member to explore, perhaps this is a trend from the members opposite. They're not really fighting for Albertans. They don't want Albertans to get all of their money back. They certainly don't want Albertans to repatriate those net contributions.
Yeah, Mr. Speaker, the members opposite are weak and hypocritical. Because this is the truth. Under
Opposition Deputy
Well, thank you, Mr. Speaker. I have a lot of patience for the member opposite when he speaks in this House because it can be quite interesting to listen to. There's no doubting that piece. But I would like to, under Standing Order 23J, using abusive or insulting language of a nature likely to create disorder, I think very clearly when the honourable member wants to start calling the opposition weak and going into those kinds of rhetorics, it's fine to talk about the policy, but he was doing really well up until about 30 seconds ago, and then it kind of slid downhill on that. So maybe we could just refocus on the debate and stop worrying about personalizing the opposition's feelings.
Opposition Deputy House Leader.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The truth is that this is a matter of debate. The strength or lack thereof, or the hypocrisy present or otherwise, is a question of debate for this legislature. Here, if nowhere else, we should be questioning whether or not the NDP government was weak, whether it was hypocritical or not. If that conversation cannot be had here as a question of politics, then I don't know where it ought to be had, Mr. Speaker. It is possible for politicians to be hypocritical. It is possible for governments to be weak. It is possible for them not to be. And the member very clearly said members opposite and the NDP, not specifying any individual. So this is clearly within the standing orders, the rulings of previous speakers, and a matter of debate.
I agree with him.
Thank you. I'm prepared to. Any other? I'm prepared to rule on the point of order. No standing order was quoted. It was. I missed that. Sorry. My apologies. With that, though, I will agree with Deputy House Leader that this is a matter of debate and should be considered that. I will also caution everyone, use of language in this House can create disorder, and so use your words, choose your words carefully, and we will continue.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And I'll just elaborate why they're weak. Because, Mr. Speaker, there's a lack of critical thought. All we hear from these members opposite is recycled sound bites, fear-mongering, and not exercising or demonstrating faith in Albertans to perpetuate and leverage their ability to create economic prosperity for their families. Now, Mr. Speaker, here's the hypocritical part, though, because I think this is more concerning. As I mentioned, the members opposite, they shriek and they screech, about affordability all the time. Well, if we had our own Alberta pension plan, we could reduce payroll taxes for Alberta workers, and not in sort of an immaterial manner. The LifeWorks report, estimates it's up to $1,400 a year for Alberta workers. And Mr. Speaker, that is a very meaningful amount. If you think about the affordability measures our government took to support earlier this year Albertans going through some challenging times, those amounts cost Albertans billions of dollars. And the ceiling of those benefits did not exceed, in most instances, $1,400. This is a very material benefit. And the wonderful thing about this, Mr. Speaker, is this is a perpetual advantage. It's not just 1 year to support Alberta workers. It supports them every single year. So, Mr. Speaker, it's very hypocritical for the members opposite to screech and yell and cry about affordability and then seek to undermine a very meaningful, powerful, game-changing impact that could help with that very thing. And I'll cede my time to my great friend who has a question.
Mr. Speaker, intervention, if I may. I wanted to follow up on what Minister for Red Deer, or member from Red Deer, just indicated, because it reflects the fact that the members opposite don't seem to understand the difference between surplus and deficits and what that means to overall finances and the benefits and the costs that come from that. So let's go back to look. The member talked about the formula that was put into legislation by Ontario in case they decided at some point in time that it was in their financial best interest to leave the pension plan. And so what did that formula say? Money in, contributions in, less contribution payments, benefit payments out. And what is the difference between those two numbers? You have a surplus or a deficit or a balance. In the case of Alberta, if you take out the Alberta and you had assumed that there was a separate account for Alberta, what the report indicated is that there were large periods of time when Alberta was putting in a lot more money than it was taking out.
Well, I appreciate that question about surpluses and deficits, Mr. Speaker. I can tell you, Mr. Speaker, that the members opposite know very little about surpluses. In fact, they know zero about surpluses. They are fiscal imbeciles as it relates to surpluses. But, Mr. Speaker, they are very well acquainted with deficits. They were reckless and irresponsible in chasing away billions of investment. When they came to power, they described Alberta as a embarrassing cousin. See, Mr. Speaker, and then they brought in a series of policies that undermined our legacy of being a land of freedom and prosperity. And for one of the first times ever, we saw a net migration out of Alberta. People would flee, unfortunately, the oppression that they were feeling. But, Mr. Speaker, I want to kind of move back a little bit to the question here, the Alberta pension plan. And it's important that we have an Alberta pension plan because, Mr. Speaker, Albertans are seeing a pattern of abuse and hostility from a joke of a Prime Minister who hates Alberta and has demonstrated that he will not hesitate to leverage the terms of a rigged partnership for his own selfish political gain. And Trudeau and other politicians want to fearmonger about an APP, hiding and distorting the truth. But, Mr. Speaker, what moral authority does a Trudeau have? They are a $1 trillion plus fiscal train wreck.
Agreed.
Now, Mr. Speaker, some argue that an APP could not match the investment returns of a CPP. Well, Mr. Speaker, even if that is true, given the asset transfer that Albertans are entitled to, and given that every year CPP contributions by Alberta businesses and workers exceed the benefits to Alberta retirees by billions every year, Albertans are in a very strong position to be much better off. And Mr. Speaker, I want to comment about the groupthink. There seems to be an unprecedented religious orthodoxy for the CPP Investment Board. And that is not wise, Mr. Speaker. It's notable that if the CPP was simply invested in an S&P 500 index exchange-traded fund, the annualized return of this index would approximate or exceed CPP returns with strong ongoing liquidity. Moreover, the CPP Investment Board is very expensive, with the CPP Investment Board costs growing from $4 million in 2000 to more than $4 billion. Why isn't people talking about that, Mr. Speaker? Employees have grown from 5 in 2000 to over 2,000 employees. The management expense being charged to Albertans and Canadians' pension funds lacks oversight, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, it's also notable that more than 50% of the CPP's investments are in private equity and private real estate, which are not subject to market rules. That means that there is uncertainty in the true value of CPP investments. Warren Buffett said that pension funds should avoid private equity, including because of a lack of transparency. Mr. Speaker, we note that Norway's sovereign fund has no private equity. Higher risk private equity investments require higher coupon rates, which may distort overall investment performance, where CPP money managers collect multi-million fees and bonuses in the short to medium term, where many of these investments reach maturity after they are gone in the long term. Mr. Speaker, there is a moral hazard that has grown inside the CPP Investment Board. But Mr. Speaker, what is most disappointing is that the CPP Investment Board would seek to inject themselves into a determination that is Albertans' decision when they have such a glaring conflict of interest. Mr. Speaker, a glaring conflict of interest. If Alberta is entitled to about 50% of the CPP assets, it means potentially hundreds of millions in reduced fees for them to support their exploding fiefdom of thousands of employees. This blatant conflict of interest, frankly, Mr. Leduc of the CPP Investment Board should be ashamed. He acted very unprofessionally. He should know better, actually, Mr. Speaker. But let's talk about Trudeau, the most incompetent joke prime minister that we've ever had to endure.
Agreed.
He said Alberta's withdrawal would weaken the pensions of millions of seniors and hardworking people in Alberta. You know what? That is false.
Agreed.
We live in a rigged partnership with Trudeau and others who are addicted to handouts from Alberta, families and businesses. Look forward to talking about this more later on.
Member from Edmonton Castle Downs.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. It's my pleasure to rise this afternoon to speak to Bill 2, the Alberta Pension Protection Act. I can tell you that on this side of the House, we've heard loud and clear that the only way to protect Albertans' pensions is to keep it in the CPP. Listening to the previous member speak and saying that this bill is super duper, well, Mr. Speaker, I can tell you that I've heard this explained from countless amounts of Albertans with 2 words, and it is unparliamentary to repeat it, but it is certainly not super duper. I can question this government about their capacity in getting information from Albertans. It was definitely something that wasn't talked about during the election. When it was brought forward in this House, we heard that they were doing consultations. Well, I can tell you, Mr. Speaker, that November 14th was the very first in-person town hall, and it was hosted by the Alberta NDP. We had our caucus represented from our leader of the official opposition, myself, the member from Edmonton Manning, the member from Edmonton Beverly Clairview, and the member from Edmonton Decore. The first in-person town hall was from the official opposition. Now, hearing from Albertans, there is an expectation that they be consulted with. And when this government put out their survey, it doesn't ask a simple question: do you want to leave the CPP? When we did our town hall, we had close to 500 people in attendance, and when we asked that question, 2 people put their hand up. That's it. When you ask Albertans very clearly, not in the loose language and the manipulated ways that they're doing their consultations, do you want to leave the CPP? No. That is what we're hearing from Albertans. When we hear the members opposite talk about concerns from the opposition, I'd like to give way to the honourable member for an intervention.
Thank you, honourable member, for accepting my intervention. And my question is, and first of all, thank you for outlining what you've heard from Albertans. But my question to you is, what in the legislation will actually ensure that Albertans' will is followed, even if they vote against leaving the CPP in a referendum? Because nothing in the bill actually requires the government to adhere to the will of Albertans. Recently, I had the opportunity to visit Glastonbury Village, a seniors' home in my riding, and I met so many amazing, valiant Canadians, senior Canadians who have served our country well, including folks who have served in our military. Many folks in their 80s and 90s are simply perplexed. They could not understand why this government is focusing on the UCPP when we have, in fact, a pension system that is the envy of the world. They couldn't understand why fiddle with it if it isn't broken.
Thank you to the honourable member, and that's an excellent point, and that's definitely what we're hearing. And I find it very concerning that the government is not acknowledging that. We have a CPP that Albertans, Canadians are happy with. I know that you had mentioned speaking with members of the military, and as the liaison to the Canadian Armed Forces and veterans, we've heard significant concern when it comes to them gambling with their pensions. I'm sure the government is well aware that those that are current active serving members in the CAF don't get to decide where they're posted. If they are posted in BC, they could be posted to Alberta. They don't have that option to say no. They come to Alberta. And there is significant concern about what that means for their pension. What happens if they are told through their employer they come here? What happens to their pension? They're paying into the CPP in every other province except Quebec. Quebec has an agreement that they get to pay in and receive the same benefits. Is Alberta going to offer that? It's very, very, very unsettling to our members of the Canadian Armed Forces when it comes to their pension. They do not trust this government with their money. We hear it over and over and over again. Just trust us. We're going to do the right thing. Well, we've seen time and again that that is not accurate, Mr. Speaker. I know when the previous member got up and saying, we keep hearing concerns from the opposition. To be clear, the opposition is being the voice of Albertans. We are speaking from the countless emails, the in-person town halls, the surveys that we've done. We are being inundated with constituents talking about concern of leaving the CPP. This isn't just us standing up talking about something. This is coming directly from those that we serve and represent, not just in our ridings, but from across the entire province, because the members of government aren't being accurate. I would like to give way to the honourable member for an intervention.
Well, thank you, MLA Castle Downs, and certainly I can reflect and let everyone know that I have never seen so much response into my constituency office on one single topic as I have with this pension issue. And this is coming from a broad spectrum of people. I mean, I know my constituents quite well, and I know which ones are conservative and not, and it's coming from everybody, Mr. Speaker, and I'm sure that the members opposite are receiving that same kind of feedback. And indeed, I know in that caucus, Mr. Speaker, that there's many people harboring serious doubts about pursuing this Alberta pension plan as well. We just had an election a few months ago, and I know that there were MLAs out against.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and thank you to the honourable member. You're absolutely right. We've heard from their very members of their own party talking about concerns, and it's very concerning. So when it comes to those that are working in Alberta but perhaps live in other parts of the country, we know that this is something significant for those that come to work here, specifically the Maritimes. What happens to those individuals? Do they get an option to pay into this pretend whatever they're calling it, or do they have an option to stay in the CPP? This is something that I've heard quite significantly, is that there's so many individuals across the country that live and or work in other provinces, may have worked their entire career in Alberta and retired to another province, or worked their entire career somewhere and came to Alberta. What happens to them if they don't want to participate in this pension plan that this government is coming up with? Are they eligible to not be a part of it? There's just so many questions that we're hearing from Albertans that this government has simply not addressed. One thing that I would really like to see, and I know so many others have expressed this, is the government going to do an in-person town hall? Is the government going to listen to people firsthand to talk about what Albertans want to talk about in real time, in face-to-face, being accountable to the decisions that they're making? I know that there's concern about the referendum question, that if it does go to referendum, what is the question going to be? Is it going to be similar to the survey that doesn't even ask, do you want to leave the CPP? Is it going to be misleading? Is it going to be vague and confusing? We have no guarantees when it comes to this government, because what they campaigned on was not this. And yet this is Bill 2, which is quite significant, Mr. Speaker. I know a lot of Albertans, like the previous member had said, that have identified as not being part of our party, are very, very upset and concerned and don't feel listened to. And so The Alberta NDP has been very clear. You want to come to our town halls? Please come. We will listen. We will be your voice in the legislature. We're going to attempt to make sure that this government hears what you're saying, because we know that they're being included in the correspondence. We know that the finance minister, the premier, their own personal MLAs are being included, and so are we. Our critic on this file from Lethbridge West and the member from Calgary Elbow have been doing a lot of work on this. And they're not the only ones who are hearing loud and clear that Albertans do not want this Alberta Pension Protection Act. I know that when it comes down to some of the language that this government has been using, like the previous member alluding to separation, Albertans are Canadians, and so many are incredibly proud to be Canadian and identify as Canadian first and then Albertan. And they're appalled at the conversations that are happening, not just with wanting to pull out of the CPP and have this government gamble with it, but that whole talk of separation is alarming. And the fact that these members get up and so freely talk about that, they're clearly not listening to what Albertans are asking. If they were, they would have withdrawn this bill. This is not something that Albertans are asking for. Bill 2 on a piece of legislation that has such a significant impact and wasn't talked about in their campaign. Mr. Speaker, there's so many things in this legislation that just sits back and talks about basically trust us, which, going back to the referendum, it's quite concerning that they're not doing what typically other governments do when holding a referendum. They're letting their cabinet come up with the question and not have it viewed by Albertans to talk about what the referendum question is. And when we look at what the survey questions are, there's several. None of them are direct. None of them ask the question that is clear and to the point, because if they did, they would hear loud and clear that Albertans do not want to leave the CPP. And so with that, Mr. Speaker, I will take my seat, but I really hope that government is listening to Albertans and acknowledge that it's not just the opposition, it is on behalf of Albertans, that we are talking directly to Albertans, responding to their correspondence, listening and voicing their concern. And so I really hope that at the end of the day that this government pays attention to what Albertans are asking for and just withdraw this bill. They do not want to leave the CPP. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Any others wishing to speak? The member for Edmonton, Beverly Clareview.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I really appreciate the chance today to have some time to speak about the Act and to share, or the bill rather, to share some of my thoughts, concerns, and questions. And so I've taken a bit of a different tact, and I've looked primarily at the first part 1, referendum, and I was really curious to note what we have in this bill versus what other provinces and other jurisdictions have in their own referenda, in the bills that respect how they run their own referendums in their own provinces. One of the reasons why I did that was because I wanted to have a sense of maybe what was missing in this particular bill as opposed to what is actually there. So, and also the fact that comparison can be absolutely enlightening when you're looking at what other folks have already done. So what I found out was that in British Columbia in 2011, they had a referendum on whether or not folks wanted to continue with the notion of the harmonized sales tax. Mm-hmm. And that actually began with a select standing committee. And that committee was there because they have something called the Recall and Initiative Act. So they had already established a select standing committee. And then the government of the day decided that it actually wanted a referendum. And so that's how BC's Bill 4 came to pass. That act specified in that referendum act that the government would decide the source of the subject to be voted on, the government would decide the date, and it also noted that authorized participants and financing rules would be determined by regulations, which of course were going to be established by the government. And I note the word government there, not cabinet, not by an order in council, but government. That means to me that all of that information came to the Assembly so that all the members of the Assembly could vote with the very best of intentions and all that information that they needed. In addition to that, because they had already had some discussions within that Recall and Initiative Act, their chief electoral officer at the time had already established what that question might be. So I'm going to say that again, their chief electoral officer, an independent officer of the House. So that person who is absolutely nonpartisan decided upon a super simple question. And it essentially said, do you want to change? It was really, really simple, super easy to understand. But what they also did, Mr. Speaker, during that time was that they made a series of regulations that allowed for people in BC to really understand what was going on. One of the things that they did was not only just to determine kind of the nitty-gritty of that process, but they also wanted the folks in BC to understand that basic information, what exactly it was they were actually going to be looking at and voting on. And so they appointed someone called the referendum funding decision maker, who at the time was a QC, so a lawyer, and that person was going to be able to appoint two specific organizations, one that represented the yes side and one that represented the no side, so that not only were folks given basic information about how a referendum has to proceed and all the process, the procedure, that sort of thing, but folks were also given the chance to hear what people were saying, hear opinions from the no side and hear opinions from the yes side, and opinions that were also had their foundation in regulation, because there were things they could and could not do. There was money they could and could not spend. And this is one of the things that this particular bill doesn't do at all. There's no notion here that perhaps it's a good idea to have information out there, not just information about how a referendum actually works for people who are going to be voting on that referendum, but also what people are saying, so that, and we've talked about misinformation, we've talked about fear-mongering. I would think that this sort of thing would stop misinformation, would stop fear-mongering. So it's curious that the folks opposite don't have that sort of portion in this particular bill. Oh, yes.
Thank you very much, Member for Edmonton Beverly Clareview, for accepting my intervention. Mr. Speaker, often our referendums are referred to as a political tool in the name of transparency and clarity to provide cover for governments who wish to move forward with a particular project that they see they have on their agenda. And oftentimes the tool itself is used to lead in the direction that the government wants things to go. And of course, there's many ways to manipulate a referendum, and we've seen that historically in our country and others. And I think the member is making some good cases as to how it might be done in a way that's at least seen to be more fair, by setting some guardrails and parameters about the nature of the referendum that a government might choose to operate under.
Thank you, Mr. Dack. Yeah, absolutely. To that point, exactly. Oh, I'm so sorry. To the member. That idea that things need to be done fairly and equitably is extraordinarily important. I suspect this is why the folks in BC did exactly that. When they had that person who was a QC act in that sort of very, very responsible manner. In an earlier referendum, they did something very, very similar as well. In conjunction with their 2009 general election, and this time they actually established a completely separate act called the Electoral Reform Referendum 2009 Act. And this is interesting because they found that their own referendum act didn't really apply, so they established a completely new act. That act said that whatever result they had would be binding on the government, but it also did, just like the one I mentioned previously in 2011, establish that opponent and proponent groups would receive public funds so that those groups could again provide information about those two opposing sides to voters who would be voting on the referendum. Not only that, it had to do with how members would be elected. Would it be first past the post, or would it be what they called a single transferable vote electoral system, which had been proposed by Citizens Assembly on Reform. An absolutely lovely idea. Make sure that both points of view are represented, but again, within some confines of regulations that the Assembly created. And not only that, I find it really interesting that they also decided to use public funds to make sure that all of these things were going to be provided to the voters of British Columbia. In addition to that, the regulations clarified how both groups would be selected and organized.
Thank you for allowing me to do the intervention, Honourable Member. I find it really interesting as you're speaking about the fact that in other jurisdictions during referendums, public dollars being used to ensure that there's appropriate information on both sides of the question, and then it's being done by an independent third party. With the way that the legislation is drafted currently in Alberta, I think that is one of the biggest concerns that I have in how this next referendum question could potentially be developed. But also the fact that under the legislation as it's written right now in Alberta, third parties are able to fundraise to create their ability to create that conversation. And so you could have a variety of different groups fundraising during a referendum to try to influence the outcome of a vote. And I think that's where, for me, the biggest concern it comes about is, you know, what happens to that money? Who's fundraising, and what exactly are they doing with that information?
Thank you, Member of Edmonton Manning. I appreciate those comments, and indeed I do believe that, again, that was the very intent of the folks in BC in both 2009 and 2011. They wanted to ensure that there was a framework by which people could figure out what it meant to vote yes and what it meant to vote no, but they also wanted to ensure that there wasn't all these pools of money being poured into this organization or that organization to influence what a voter might think. And so what they did was something I think was quite reasonable. They made sure that people would have access to public funds to publicly and transparently provide information to the voters of British Columbia. So in BC, it was the government which established the process, not Cabinet. And it's curious that in this bill, it's Cabinet that establishes the process, not the Assembly itself. In both instances, those acts and regulations dealt with ensuring that the question was created not by Cabinet or Order in Council, but by that absolutely away from the legislature, away from Cabinet, away from Order and Council, independent third party. So the voters, in fact, could make sure that it was a question that was asked in the most responsible and reasonable manner. And I wonder why we're not having that here in Bill 2. Mm-hmm. Interestingly enough, Prince Edward Island, so I'm going from west to east here, Prince Edward Island also had their own referendum in 2019, and they conducted a referendum also on electoral reform, which seems to be the word of the day, at the same time as their provincial election. Their act was entitled the Electoral System Referendum Act, and what's totally cool about it, makes my teacher heart feel good, is the Act includes so many details. And in fact, they begin by noting what the purpose of the Act is. They talk about how the process needs to be transparent and fair in order to obtain a clear expression of the will of islanders. They talk about how the referendum question will enable the expression of a sovereign decision by islanders as to their electoral future. They provide for the appointment of a referendum commissioner who's an officer of the Legislative Assembly. So again, that person who's that official person, but who is apart from the legislature. And I yield to the member.
Thank you to the honourable member. And Mr. Speaker, I came as an international student in 2011, and there are millions of immigrants who come to Canada, find their home here in Alberta and in Canada. And, thing is that they come to Canada because they believe that Canada has a place for them. They believe in Canadian healthcare system. They believe that their kids will be able to get proper education in Canada, and they believe that their pensions will be secure when they get old. And unfortunately, on all three fronts, we have seen that in Alberta, we have a government that is privatizing healthcare, that is jacking up the education fees, and that is gambling with their pensions, Mr. Speaker. And I held a press conference with small business owners in my riding in Calgary Northeast. They have openly spoken against it. And I've heard from so many business leaders, so many business councils, they have openly spoken against it. And that is why we need a government in Alberta that will listen to Albertans.
Thank you very much to my colleague, and to kind of just piggyback on what he just said, and talking about those small business owners. I too have been speaking to small business owners in my riding, and just like the folks that he has been talking with, the small business owners in Beverly Clareview are also very concerned about what this means, and they are not uniformly in favor of moving from the CPP to the APP. What I'd like to do at this point is to read just a little bit of an excerpt from a couple of constituents who have contacted my office in terms of what it is they're thinking. So we have one who says, I write to you today to express my deep concerns regarding the proposal for Alberta to develop a pension plan and remove current and future pension contributors and beneficiaries from the CPP. The Canada Pension Plan is the envy of the world, with CPP outperforming international peers on all fronts over the past 2 decades. The case for an Alberta pension plan is short-sighted and rests on dubious assumptions, including the belief that Alberta could extract concessions from the rest of Canada. Establishing an Alberta pension plan would expose Albertans to unnecessary risk and instability. I encourage you to use your position to advocate for current and future Albertans to continue to enjoy the benefits of a pooled national pension plan and end the folly and associated cost of pursuing an APP. The motivation to establish an APP is entirely political and is built on fictional notions of perceived inequality. And Mr. Speaker, that's only one email that I've received. I have received, I know many other colleagues of mine have hundreds of emails. And I must say that for about every 10 emails, there is perhaps a person asking a question. And my staff and I are very, very happy to answer their questions and to clarify some of those concerns and some of those worries that they might have. Another person says, I am your constituent and I am writing to ask that you commit to keeping Alberta in the Canada Pension Plan. For most Albertans, the CPP is their only source of retirement income. It's not worth the risk. According to pension experts, pulling Alberta out of the Canada Pension Plan is pure spite, and there's nothing in it for us. The risks and added costs are potentially catastrophic. Albertans deserve to retire securely and with dignity, and our retirement savings should not be used for political posturing.
Members, pursuant to Standing Order 4.2, the Assembly stands adjourned until Monday afternoon at 1:30.